Howdy folks, welcome to Module 1 of the CompTIA Information Technology Fundamentals course. Now this is also known as ITF Plus for short, which is a heck of a lot easier to say quickly. So I think let's just call it that from now on. Now for those of you that don't know this already, maybe you did not see the introductory video to this course, the course consists of 6 modules. So if you covered all 6 modules, you would have covered the whole course and you would actually be able to pass the exam. So I'm going to make 6 dedicated videos. Each of them will cover a whole module. And if you go and watch all 6 of these dedicated videos, you'll be able to go and pass the exam, assuming, of course, you understand all the content in these modules. Now, each module, for those of you that don't know, consists of various units. I suppose you can call these sections. The one we're doing today is module 1, which consists of 5 units. So I suppose you could say 5 subsections in this module, and every module will have a different amount of units. Now, just to give you guys a bit of an idea of what these units are for this specific module, Unit 1, so here's an agenda for you guys, is Common Computing Devices. This will be followed by Unit 2, using a workstation, then Unit 3, using an operating system, followed by Unit 4, managing an operating system, and then the last one, folks, Unit 5, troubleshooting and support. Now, looking at the list in front of us, this agenda, that absolutely is not necessarily everything that's going to be covered in this module. That, folks, is simply the sections, or as CompTIA now calls it, units. So if you want a more accurate list as to what is actually covered in this module, and I'm going to be doing this for all the videos, you can find that in the video description down below. So if you look at the bottom of the video, there's a video description section, and there I actually listed for you guys a more accurate list of what the topics is in this video with nice convenient timestamps for you guys. So if you are looking for a specific topic, maybe there's just something specific that you want to go and revise on, maybe there's something specific that you want to go and troubleshoot on, whatever your personal situation is, if you don't want to watch the whole video and you just want to go and check out specific topics, the list down below should give you a more accurate idea of what the heck there is and exactly where in the video you can go and find that. So it's going to save you a heck of a lot of time. Guys, it took me forever to make those timestamps, so please feel free to go and make use of those timestamps. It's going to make your life easier. At the end of the day, that was the idea. Alright, so if you haven't done it already, please do your homie here a favor and give this video a like. So at the bottom of the video, smack that like button. It does help me, it does help the channel, and then obviously more people are going to be seeing this video, which means we're all going to be able to help a lot more people out there that cannot afford to pay for their own training material. And guys, if you would like to know when module 2 of this course gets released, or if I upload any other free training material, maybe consider subscribing, and at least YouTube will inform you of, well, when one of the videos goes live. Alright folks, now that I've got all the mumbo jumbo out of the way, I think let's go learn something. Alright folks, we're going to start things off by jumping into Unit 1. Remember there's 5 of them. Unit 1 was Common Computing Devices. Now within this unit, the first topic we're going to be talking about is Information Technology. In other words, IT for short. So just information technology in general. So let's start with computer systems. So for those of you not familiar with computer systems in general, this is generally what we will go and use to go and do things like process data, do calculations, store your information. This can be things like your pictures, your videos, your games, anything personal or important, quite frankly. And computer systems is also actually what we use to go and transfer data. So if I've got something like a laptop or a desktop in front of me, I can actually use that to transfer data to you. And this could be while you're sitting at your office. Maybe you're sitting at home. If I've got something on my machine, I can use that machine to get information onto your machine, wherever the heck you might be, and whatever the heck this information might be. Now, believe it or not, when I say computer systems, this is actually these days not just limited to laptops and desktops. These days, when we say computer systems, it can actually be a lot of things, guys. This can actually be a phone, it can be a tablet, and much, much more. Now, moving on to what we call digital information. So we've got an idea that when I do transfer from one machine to another, it's probably going to be data or information. Now, that information could be, but is not limited to, things like words, numbers, pictures, and of course, we know it's going to be much more than what my list here has. I mean, it can obviously be videos and games and a whole bunch of other stuff, which could potentially even be illegal for all I know. Who am I to say what you can do on your machine and what not? Then, when it comes to IT systems to process data, so you'll notice I did not say computers to process data. I said IT systems to process data. You get a lot of things out there, folks, that can actually process your data, and it's not always going to be a computer. Now, starting this list off, the first thing that comes to mind obviously is computers, since we literally just mentioned that. So that is one of the main things we'll use out there in the world to go and do things like processing your data. But just to add on to this list, it can actually also potentially be something like your telecommunications networks, folks. So those phone providers, your internet providers, all those folks and those companies, that is actually something that can be used to process your data. And then I'll add one more to this list again, just so that you know what we're getting at. Programmable electronic device. Yep, guys, if you go out there in the world nowadays, you'll find there are an insane amount of programmable electronic devices. And a lot of these actually use something called IoT, which is short for Internet of Things. It's basically a special kind of operating system you'll install on all kinds of nonsense around you, things you wouldn't even think about. I mean, if you go to the ATM now to go withdraw money, that operating system running on that machine, guys, is usually going to be Internet of Things. Yep. And then the last little subsection I want to add here before we move on to the next topic is information age. Guys, what I mean by this, we are currently finding ourselves in the 21st century, if I can even call it that nowadays. And you probably would have noticed we've got technology everywhere around us. I mean, if you go look at a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old child nowadays, you'll find that their parents probably bought them a smartphone. Yeah, that is the information technology age. Everybody has got some sort of smart device, maybe not the world's fanciest one or the most expensive one, but somewhere most of us have got access to, well, information technology. We've got access to devices that could do some sort of calculation. It might not be a laptop or a desktop because some of us don't have money. It might not be a smartphone, but somewhere you've got access to smart devices. It might not belong to you, but you've got access to it. It's everywhere around us. If you go look at how we used to do things, your everyday things about 10, 20 years ago, a lot of things was, well, manual and it was analog. Nowadays, everything is becoming automated. It's becoming digital. It's becoming remote. It's moving into the cloud, and it's just getting better and better and better. So much so that actually a lot of people are starting to go into a panic nowadays, thinking that computers are going to take the world over. I don't really think it's going to come down to that, but let's wait and see what happens, I guess. All right, folks, moving on to the next topic here, desktop and workstation computers. All right, so you probably would have noticed by now we've got a lot of different kinds of computers. The two main ones obviously being a laptop and a desktop. So if you don't know what a desktop is, that's the kind of computer that's got an actual screen that you put on a desk. It's got a keyboard that's usually loose on that desk. It's got a mouse that's lying loose on that desk. It's got a case, which we sometimes call a system unit. And in that case, if you were to open it, you'll see all the components of your computer. At least that's what a standard desktop computer looks like. Now, speaking of which, I'm going to list something here for you guys, and that would be computer case with peripherals. So if you don't know what that looks like, since I just mentioned it, there's a bit of a picture for you guys. It's not the best picture, but it should serve as a more or less idea of what a computer is, along with its peripherals. So if you look there on the right, we've got a bit of a computer screen. You can see it's blue at the moment. It's got a webcam on top of it. We've got a mouse and a keyboard towards the front. We've got a speaker there in the middle, and then on the right behind the screen, we've also got a speaker. Directly behind the screen, we've got what we call the case, which is also known as the system unit. And then way on the left, we've got the printer. Now, that keyboard and the mouse and that kind of stuff, that, guys, is what we consider the peripherals of your computer. And the actual case behind the screen, well, that is the computer. The screen you see is not actually the computer. A lot of people are under the impression that the screen that they're looking at is the computer. No, guys, that's not the computer. The screen simply displays what is going on the computer, but it's in fact not the computer. Well, at least most of the time it's not, depending on the PC you've got. It's usually the box, which is below the desk or somewhere on top of your desk. That box is actually the computer, guys. Now, these desktop computers, like the one we've got there in the picture, guys, they're very easy to modify and they're very easy to go and upgrade. And to add on to that, they're actually very cheap to go and modify and upgrade. Well, at least when it comes to laptops. If you compare a desktop PC to something like a laptop, a desktop PC is generally going to be a heck of a lot cheaper for the same kind of specs, and they're going to be a heck of a lot easier to go and modify, and you can modify them a heck of a lot more. Laptops, on the other hand, those things often cost up to twice as much for the same specs, or very close to twice as much. You cannot always go and upgrade them. You cannot always go and modify them. And if you can go and modify and upgrade them, you're very limited as to what you can actually go and do. And God forbid if that machine ever breaks, it's a mission to go and fix it. A heck of a lot harder to fix than when it comes to a desktop PC. Desktop machines, very easy. Just slide open the panel of the box and it'll immediately expose the motherboard along with a whole bunch of other components, the RAM, the CPU, the hard drive, the power supply unit, and everything else you can expect to find inside a computer case. You've got a lot of room to work with in there. You'll find even the cheapest of desktop machines can generally be modified and upgraded. Laptops, even if you buy the most expensive one, that does not guarantee that you can always go and modify it or upgrade it, guys. Then we also have something called an all-in-one PC. Sometimes these are just called AIOs, all-in-ones. If you don't know what they look like, there's a bit of a picture for you guys. So at first glance, you might think, oh, that is just another screen for a computer, since previously I told you guys the screen is just a screen displaying what's going on the computer. Now that screen, guys, believe it or not, is actually the computer. Hence the name all in one. So an all in one means everything is inside your screen. Now what you'll immediately notice about those kinds of screens is they're often a little bit thicker than your normal conventional computer screen. A normal desktop screen, it's going to be a little bit thinner because it is, well, just a screen. But an all-in-one has got a whole bunch of stuff in it as well besides the screen. It's got the motherboard of the computer, it's got the RAM and the processor, and since it's got so much more, it's not uncommon to find that these screens are actually a heck of a lot bigger, they're thicker, they're heavier, because, well, guys, obviously it contains a heck of a lot more, so it just makes sense. Alright, folks, I'm gonna once again move on to the next topic, which is now servers. Now, if you guys are watching this video, chances are you might never have actually worked on a server yet. That's the key word, yet. And you more than likely have probably never been in an actual server room. Now, the funny thing about servers, guys, is they're not always found in a server room. Most of the time, yes, they will be in a server room due to how big they are and how expensive they are, and because we need to keep them cool and because we need to keep them safe. So that's generally why you would find them in a server room. It's not the only reason, but it's also not uncommon actually to find a server room somewhere else. This might actually be in your own home, even for all we know, but I've seen quite a few servers that will actually be standing around in someone's office. It's not necessarily the biggest server or the most expensive server, but it can actually be standing around in an office. And these servers, when they stand around in an office, it might actually look like an actual server, or in some cases, it can actually be a normal computer, a laptop or a desktop even, which has just been converted into a server. So on that note, guys, a server can be any computer that provides a service, which is why I said it can actually be a desktop or a laptop. So if you've got a normal desktop or laptop there in your office, which is just being used by a normal office worker for normal day-to-day stuff, then it's probably just a desktop or a laptop. We call that a client. Now, if you take that desktop, for instance, and you go and install the server operating system onto it, or you go and have that desktop PC provide some sort of service in your company or your network, that could very well now be called a server. So if that desktop PC is now being used as a storage location, maybe everybody in the office is storing their information and backing up their information onto that desktop PC, guess what, guys? That is kind of technically a server now because it's providing a service. What service is it providing? It is storing people's data, or it's backupping people's data. So as soon as a server provides some sort of service, that's when we actually call it a server. So if I now go and I take a desktop PC or even an actual server and I install the server operating system onto it, because you actually get an operating system which is called server. So if you install the server operating system onto a server or a desktop computer, it's still technically not a server. It may or may not have server hardware in it, but it's not technically a server until it provides me or my company with a service. So if I go into that server and I go and configure it or tweak it to do something for me or my company, to provide me or my company or my client's company of some sort of service, yes, now it's a server, guys. So server class hardware, in case you guys don't know, can support many users and it's very reliable. If you go and compare your standard desktop PC or even a laptop to a server, you'll find that servers normally have a heck of a lot more hardware, or a heck of a lot more resources, should I say. So if you go to look at the RAM in a server, it's probably going to be a heck of a lot more than your standard desktop or laptop. If you look at the processing power, the CPU, in other words, the brain of a server, it's a heck of a lot faster. It can do way more than your standard desktop and laptop and way quicker. If you look at the average amount of storage available on a server, generally it's going to be way more than what you'd find on your desktop or your laptop. In all ways and senses, servers are normally better, but they're also more reliable. If you go look at something like the RAM, that will be the memory inside a server. It cannot go and encounter errors. Generally, it's not going to happen. If you run a laptop or a desktop, you'll often find that it'll flash of like a blue screen, and this is known as a blue screen of death. So maybe here you are working on a document, or you're playing a game, minding your own business, not doing anything funky on that machine. Suddenly the computer crashes. It shows you a blue screen for like a fraction of a second with a weird error, and you've got no idea what's going on, and the computer just restarts. Now that is an example of a laptop or a desktop being unreliable. That, folks, is a memory error. Not something you need to worry about at this point in time, but I just want to make it clear that that's actually a memory error, and that kind of thing is something you would not encounter on a server, because servers have got special kind of reliable hardware which prevents this kinds of nonsense from happening. So yeah, servers are way cooler, way more reliable, but trust me, you're going to pay extra for that special hardware. The more extra special it is, the more extra special the price will be, if I can put it that way. Then we've got redundancy and fault tolerance, guys. So on servers, it's not uncommon to find us doubling up on everything and anything. Whatever we've got in a server environment, we'll probably go and get two or more of that something, so that if the one fails, the second one and the third one will basically just keep on doing what it was supposed to do and carrying on the load. So if I create a server to provide me of some sort of service, I'm probably going to go and create two or three of the exact same server. They're basically going to be clones of one another. Twins. They're going to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. And God forbid, if one of these servers crashes or fails or is just down for maintenance, the other remaining server or servers will carry on doing what they're supposed to do. And at the end of the day, what's going to happen here is, from the user's perspective, they will never even know that a server has crashed or the server's offline, because they can still do what they would normally go and do. They're none the wiser. And ideally, that's what we want the user to experience. They should never know there's a problem. We can then silently in the background go and resolve this issue. Now, as for form factors regarding servers, what do they actually look like? Where do we find them? At the beginning of this topic, I did tell you this could actually technically be even just randomly in your office, but it's more common to find these in server rooms. And normally a server would be rack mounted. It'll be a flat, long kind of thing, and you will slide these in a server room into what we call racks. If I just say it like that, that probably is going to make absolutely no sense to you guys. So let me give you guys a picture. There you go. So that is a server room. At the moment, it's kind of empty. You'll see that those long things we've got there, those are racks. And I can slide a server into those racks. Now, if it slides into one of those racks, we call that a U. It's one U, not something you guys need to know, not something you guys need to worry about. That's not something that's asked in this course's exam. Heck, guys, that's not even asked in the A plus or even the N plus exam. So if you understand what that is, well, great for you, because that's not even A plus or N plus territory. That's beyond that. That's server territory. Now, if you go and take one of those flat servers, you can slide it into one of those racks, which is called a 1U. And some servers and some devices we slide in, they take like 2 racks, or they take like 3 racks. So we'll say it takes 2 U's, or it takes 3 U's. Now you know. So that is what the average server looks like. It slides into a rack. Now, once it's done and it looks fancy and it looks clean, it'll probably look something like this. Maybe not exactly like this. This is probably exaggerating a little bit. But that's an example of a fancy server room once it's complete. It's going to be in racks. It's going to be closed. It's going to be neat. They're going to have air conditioning running there day and night. The server room's going to be locked. That's generally what it's going to look like. The final product once you are done, guys. Now, just to show you what other kinds of servers we get, guys, here is a tower server. So instead of having an actual server room, like the ones you saw now just a moment ago, and instead of taking a normal desktop PC or a laptop and converting that into a server, you actually get tower servers, which look something like this. At first glance, you might actually think it's a desktop PC's case, but it's not. If you look closer, in real life, guys, these are generally a little bit bigger in size. They're about, I don't know, maybe 50% bigger. So the size of a standard case, add about 50% to that. That's roughly the size of a tower case. Sometimes it's literally double the size of a computer case. So the picture, you might think it's the same size, it does the same thing, but in reality, trust me, when you actually see it in real life, it's sometimes almost twice as big, these tower cases. They can be anywhere. They can be randomly in an office somewhere, but once again, it actually is more common to find these in server rooms as well, but you'll probably find them in a smaller server room for a smaller company of 20 or 50 or 100 people. It's not something you'll find in a big office environment, a medium to a large size company. This is something I would normally only see in small size companies, if they even need an actual server like that. Alright folks, moving on to the next topic, which is laptops. So earlier we did discuss desktop computers, and then we moved on to servers. Now we've got what we call laptops. So as you guys know, a laptop is very much the same as a desktop computer, at least when it comes to performance. However, laptops are a lot smaller, a lot more compact. They cost you sometimes twice as much, and as we discussed in the beginning of this course, it's not always as easy or as cheap to go and upgrade these things. So if I need to go and fix them as well, not that easy. It's quite a mission to go and fix them. If you go look at a desktop PC, something we discussed earlier, if you were to go and open one of them, it's basically, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. They're very, very much the same. If you can fix one of them, you can probably fix the other ones because they're very much the same. Laptops at first glance, they might look the same, but guys, if you were to go and actually open a laptop, like physically go and open the panels and start stripping it apart and start troubleshooting, you'll very quickly realize that laptops, they don't look the same inside. Even if you get 2 laptops that are the same brand. These can be 2 laptops the same brand, just a different model. I'm telling you now, if you open it up, you'll find that the components are not always going to be in the same place. So the first laptop, if you flip it upside down and you remove the back panel, it might be one panel, it might be multiple panels. It might first expose the hard drive and the RAM, if you know what that is. As compared to the next laptop, you might have to strip that whole laptop apart to get to the hard drive or the RAM. It's not always going to be the same. Now guys, looking at the picture that we've got on the screen, ironically the first topic I want to mention is the built-in screen. So the screen of most laptops, guys, actually all laptops, is built in. Now that does not stop you from using an external screen. You'll find that the majority of laptops have got some sort of ports on the side. We call those I/O ports, the input-output ports. You can see that at the bottom left. Those ports can be used to, well, hook up an external screen. This could be via a VGA cable. So that'll be the one that's got like a little blue port. That's the old analog lines. It could be via an HDMI cable. It could be via DisplayPort cable. The point I'm trying to make here is you can connect an external screen. This could be a computer screen, it can be a TV screen, this can be a projector. You've got a whole big variety to go and choose from. So there's a lot of people I'm aware of where they actually broke their laptop screens, and instead of having it fixed because maybe they don't have the money or the time or the knowledge or the know-how, all that, they'll just close the laptop screen and they'll actually work on an external screen, and they'll even plug in an external keyboard and an external mouse and the laptop will just remain closed there. The screen actually remain closed, but the laptop won't be turned off. You can actually go and configure in the laptop settings what happens when you close the screen. Some laptops, if you close the screen, it'll turn the laptop off. Other ones will just kind of pause everything on the machine, kind of like go into a hibernation mode, where the rest of them, just nothing will happen. The screen might be closed, but the laptop is actually still on. It's still running. So you can go and choose to, just keep the laptop running if you close the screen. Plug in an external screen, plug in an external mouse and a keyboard, and it will run just fine. Now, speaking of keyboard, you'll find that laptops always have a built-in keyboard. They don't always have a numeric keypad, so that will be the way on the right of the keyboard. You'll find that they don't always have a numeric keypad which has got a bunch of numbers there on the right. It'll have numbers, but that'll be towards the top of the keyboard. But as for the numbers on the right of the keyboard, those you'll find almost always on a desktop keyboard. But on a laptop, if you have that on the right, consider yourself lucky because they don't always have that. Generally, you'll find most laptops have a built-in mouse. We call that a touchpad, but it's not limited to a touchpad. If you look at some of the older laptops, it's not always a touchpad. It could possibly be a joystick. I think that's what they call it. And this is often located on the keyboard between the letters G and H. So it's a very small little rubber kind of feeling little sticky that's sticking out between the keys. And if you hold your finger on it, you can actually, integrate and move the mouse around with that little stick. I didn't use those a lot in my life because, nowadays it's all just touchpads and mouses, but when they were out, I did use them. It's just not as much as I would have liked to. I'm not a fan of it though, so yeah. And then lastly, guys, something I did mention briefly earlier, the I/O ports. So the I/O ports, the I and the O stands for input and output. So that will be things that inputs information into the machine, something like a keyboard or a mouse, maybe even a webcam or an external webcam. That is an input device. It provides the machine with input. An output device would be a device that actually, outputs information. Something like a printer would actually be a good example. An external screen, possibly speakers. These are devices that receive information from the machine and outputs it. So if you look at speakers, it'll output the audio that it's receiving from your computer. If it's like a screen, it's going to receive information from your laptop and it's going to display it on an external screen. If it's a printer, it's going to receive information, it's going to print it out for you. Now, a printer could possibly be an output device and an input device because if you're lucky enough to have a printer that actually has the ability to go and scan, then it would actually technically be an input and an output device, guys. All right, moving on to smartphones and tablets. So the first thing I'm going to mention is smartphones and tablets are handheld computers. Once again, it's just another example for computer. And at the beginning of this module, I did mention that computers are not necessarily limited to laptops and desktops, guys. These days, it can be anything. Laptop, desktop, tablet, phone, you name it. It could be pretty much anything these days. So these handheld computers, they're actually derived from early personal data assistants, which was known as PDAs. Now, I haven't actually heard that word in many, many moons, but, maybe about 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if someone had a lot of money, and they wanted to be fancy and they wanted to show off, you probably would have seen or heard someone with what they call a PDA. At first glance, it actually looked like a smartphone. But back then, people didn't exactly have smartphones. These were called PDAs. It was not uncommon to see them with like a little pen-looking thing, which we call a stylus, and they could use that to, write on a screen and integrate and do all kinds of things on the screen. So yeah, that was a PDA. That's what smartphones are derived from, believe it or not. Now, the average smartphone, or actually most of these handheld computers these days, they receive input via touchscreens. I mean, when last have you seen someone with a device like a phone that's got an actual keyboard on it where you can go and press on the buttons? I mean, I'm sure they're still out there. If you go look hard enough, you'll probably find them. But generally speaking, the average phone nowadays, the average tablet nowadays, even if you go buy a cheap one, which is an old one maybe, you'll find that they all work with, a touchscreen. So you've got to actually touch the screen to provide input to this device. Now, sometimes this touchscreen works with pressure. So if you physically press on the screen, that's actually what allows the phone or the tablet to know that you're pressing on the screen and where you're pressing on it. Other ones actually work with heat, guys. So if you bring your finger close enough to the screen without actually touching the screen, you'll notice the screen is in fact actually going to respond to your finger because, it senses the heat from your finger. Now, something that you may or may not know is these handheld computers, pretty much all of them work with something called solid state storage. Same with flash drives. So phones, tablets, flash drives, these all work with solid state storage. So in other words, the little built-in storage in that device, which is technically a little hard drive, it doesn't have any movable parts. If you look at your standard desktop or laptop computer, the hard drive storage is actually usually of such nature where it's got movable parts. We call that a mechanical hard drive these days, but back in the day we just called them hard drives because that was the only kind of hard drive you would get for a laptop or desktop, was the kind where it had disks and spindles and things that actually moves around. Nowadays, however, a laptop and a desktop, it's a 50-50. It could have a mechanical hard drive, or it could have a solid state hard drive, or it could possibly have a combination of the two. So if it's a solid state hard drive, it doesn't work with actual spindles. It's got no little arms. There's no parts that actually move around. If it's a mechanical hard drive, however, it's got a bunch of disks. It's got a little arm, which we call an actuating arm. It's got a whole bunch of moving parts, and if you drop that hard drive, it actually breaks. So we don't want to drop those hard drives, and they're actually very weak in many ways. Solid state hard drives, however, you can go and drop those suckers. Nothing will happen to them because, well, they're solid state. They do have their own drawbacks, though, as well, but that's not really something we discuss in this course. That's more A+ territory. If you would like to know more about that, maybe go check out the A+ course. Now, as for different formats and sizes, the actual sizes that these devices come in. If you look at smartphones, generally these would be between about 4.5 to 5.7 inches. If you look at something called a phablet, for those of you that know what that is, that's only between 5 and 7 inches. And if you look at a tablet, that's generally between 7 and 10 inches. Now, before anyone goes and asks in the comment section down below, I know some of the guys are probably going to ask me, what's a phablet? A phablet, guys, is basically the love child of a smartphone and a tablet, if I've got to put it that way. It's a combination between a smartphone and a tablet. It's the middle one in between. It's something that's not that common. I mean, smartphones, you find them everywhere. Tablets, you find them everywhere. Now, I want you to imagine a standard smartphone and a tablet, and then imagine something exactly in between that. It's a little bit bigger than a phone, but it's smaller than a tablet. It's almost like a note. If you look at like an oversized phone, some of these oversized smartphones, they call them notes. It's very close to being a note. In some cases, a note actually might be a phablet. So it's not a note. It's maybe a little bit bigger than a note. It's like a very, very big phone, but it's a little bit smaller than a tablet. I mean, if you look at the biggest size of a phablet, the biggest size they can go is 7 inches. But if you look at the smallest tablet, they're also 7 inches. So the biggest phablet might look exactly like the smallest tablet. At first glance, you might not even know whether it's a phablet or a tablet. It's probably going to be a tablet though, since they're actually way more common. As for the vendors that we get these smartphones and tablets and phablets in, there is many guys. I'm not going to mention them all in this course of this video. I'm only going to mention the ones that's covered by CompTIA in this course, because that's the ones they may or may not ask you in the exam, although I've never seen this as a question in the exam. So if you look at smartphone market, this is dominated by Apple and Samsung. Yes, there are many other big names. If you go to your local tech store or phone store, yes, you're going to find some pretty well-known names there. But at the moment, Apple and Samsung, believe it or not, is currently dominating the market. Obviously we know this is a very fragile market, so tomorrow this might very quickly change. Other brands of vendors you might see quite commonly in your stores as well is LG, HTC, Huawei, Motorola, Microsoft, Nokia, Sony, and Amazon, of course. Yes, once again, I'm well aware there's many other ones that I've missed, but they're not covered in this course, and it's obviously going to vary from country to country as well. You might want to go and send a comment, but hey, in my country, I see the following brand is probably the most well-known one, but I don't see it in this list. Yes, I'm well aware. You've got to keep in mind, the course is an American course, and they're coming at this mostly from an American perspective. And that's saying something, because I'm not American, guys. For those of you that don't know, I'm not American. I'm actually not even English. English is not my first language. It's a second or a third language for me. So pardon my English if I don't always say words correctly or pronounce them correctly, as they say. It's not my first language. Now, as for these phones, it's going to vary from country to country, guys. But that is what you need to know for this course. Alright folks, let's move on to the next topic, which is Internet of Things. Now this is actually more commonly known as IoT for short. So you'll hear everybody just referring to IoT. Some people might call this Internet of Things. If you don't know what it is, which is actually very common, It's actually everywhere around us, believe it or not. So if you, for example, now go to the average ATM these days, I'm not saying this applies to all of them, that operating system running on that ATM, guys, when you go withdraw your money and make a deposit and all that kinds of stuff, that is actually Internet of Things. This is actually going to come across everywhere around us. I mean, you've probably seen by now, technology is everywhere. And a lot of that technology, a lot of these machines we see around us, those machines are actually using something called Internet of Things. Now, we're going to approach this from a home automation perspective, but just know that this does extend further than that. So coming at this from a home automation perspective, this could possibly be something like a hub with voice control. So if you're lucky enough to have one of these fancy doohickeys in your home, it might look like something in a picture or it might not, but generally it'll be some sort of hub in your home. You can speak to it, you can give it commands, it'll do things in your home, it'll do all kinds of things for you. So this hub could actually go and, for example, dim your lights. This hub could, for example, close your blinds, open your blinds, and lots more, just to give you an idea. Now to add on to this list, and I'm going to add quite a few to this list, thermostats. Guys, it might look like what you see in the picture. I mean, that's just to give you guys a ballpark idea. Some of them are fancier, some of them are less fancy. But some of these newer thermostats that you would come across, you would find that they're actually quite fancy. There's a lot they can do. They can automatically go and increase the temperature or decrease the temperature. You can go and set timers. You can do all kinds of fun and fancy stuff with these thermostats. So it's not like in the old days where you'll go twist a dial or press a button and it'll increase or decrease the temperature and that's that. It'll stay on that until you go turn it off or increase or decrease it again. These days it's a little bit more than that, guys. We've also got security systems. So security systems is actually, unfortunately, a very wide net that I'm casting here for you guys. It includes a lot of things. Way too much for me to mention in this course, but it could possibly be things like your surveillance systems. I mean, if you look at the picture, it could be that. So it's not just a camera. Some of these will be motion sensor. It'll automatically inform you or a bunch of people, maybe a security company, if it senses something. It'll pop up possibly on your phone and show you something is going on in certain areas. Could be laser sensors, which is a little excessive, and much more. I mean, if you look at the picture, for crying out loud, you'll see that's just to give you guys a ballpark idea. Obviously, it once again extends way further than what we see in this picture. Then we've got IP cameras. I'm not sure why that's in the course, because to me it personally feels like this actually falls under security systems. If you're wondering why it's in the list, guys, it's because it's part of the course. I've got to try and cover this course the way it was meant to be covered, and unfortunately that's the way it was meant to be delivered. If it was up to me, I would have just added that under security systems, because, well, it's a security system. But you've got IP cameras as well. It's not just a camera nowadays. Now it's an IP camera. It can do way more than just recording your standard video feed. Way more than that. Then you've got your home appliances. Goodness gracious. I mean, if you look at the picture there on the right, it could be your TV. That's probably one of the first things that comes to mind. Nowadays, you can go and talk to your TV, depending on how much money you're willing to spend on it. You can go and integrate your phone with your TV and a whole bunch of other things in your home environment with your TV. And it's not just a matter of you turning on the TV with a remote and controlling of the remote. I mean, yes, you still get that, but it's way more than just that. You get your home entertainment system, you've got your tablets, your lights, your thermostat, and much more. All of this can integrate with one another, or they can be environments of their own. So I can now, for example, go and turn the lights off in my home, or turn them on, or dim them with my remote. I can go and control them with my smartphone or my tablet. I can give them voice commands. I can go and clap my hands and the lights will go and do something. Same can be said about your TV. Same can be said about the temperature in your home. You can control all of this from one convenient location, which could possibly be a tablet for all we know. I mean, I really feel like I'm kind of selling you guys something here. I promise you I'm not selling you guys something. This really just is a topic in the course. Now, we can also try and approach this from a modern cars or drones perspective. So we've just came at this from a home perspective, home automation. This can be in cars, can be in drones. I mean, earlier I even gave you the example of an ATM, and it can be way more than that. So if you look at this from a car or a drone perspective, guys, you'll see these newer, fancier models of cars. You can actually talk to them. Some of them drive themselves. Now, I unfortunately don't have a car like that. It's way too fancy for me and way above my pay grade. But if you've got enough money, you can actually go and get yourself a car that can drive itself. Whether it'll actually be possible in your country and whether it'll be legal in your country is a totally different story. In my country, for example, it's completely illegal to go and drive a car that drives itself. Not allowed in my country. In some other countries, this is perfectly acceptable, perhaps. So you can go and once again talk to the car, give it all kinds of instructions. It's got a pretty cool infotainment system. And well, if you go into that, it's basically a computer. Lastly, folks, before we conclude this topic, I think I'm going to add one more angle to this, one more perspective to this, and that would be medical devices. Not really something you guys are directly going to be working with, because if you're looking at this course or if you're doing this course, you're 10 to 1 going to be doing something in IT. This is more medical than IT. I mean, there's a bit of an overlap, of course, as you can imagine, but there's going to be probably be more a doctor that's going to be implanting this and managing this, instead of us. I mean, what do we know about medical? I don't know anything about medical besides to go and take a painkiller if I've got pain or to go and see my doctor if I start getting really sick. But if you look at the picture, there's a couple of examples as to what this might possibly be if you come and get it from a medical perspective. And like usual, it obviously extends further than that. Alright, folks, and then I'm going to move us on to the last topic for this unit. We're currently still in Unit 1, believe it or not. The last topic is gaming consoles. Now, I think a lot of you guys probably know what a gaming console is, even if you don't necessarily have one, maybe you can't afford one. We all know what they are, and we probably all want one. Now, if you didn't know, they actually have the same sort of components as a computer. It also has a processor, or more than one, usually there's at least one. It generally also has storage, which is a hard drive. Most of these, if not all of them, have some sort of graphics card and much, much more. Now, gaming consoles, even though they're pretty expensive, if you want to play a game on a gaming console and if you want to play that exact same game on a computer, on average, the gaming console will work you out cheaper if you look at the components you would need to go and play it. More specifically, the price of these components. So if I need to go and buy a pretty decent gaming console and a pretty decent gaming computer to play the exact same game, let's say it's maybe one of the new modern games, to be able to play that game on both of these, the computer is probably going to cost you twice as much, if not 3 times as much. Generally, computers are way more expensive when it comes to computer parts. Now, this was not always the case. Computers used to be the cheaper one out of the two. Then they became more expensive, and now lately it's as if computers are, I don't know, it's kind of like they're closing the gap again between gaming consoles and computers. Now, that's just my personal opinion. You can ignore me on that topic there. It's just something I've noticed. The parts for computers are becoming more and more affordable again. I'm not saying it is affordable, it's just more affordable. Anyway, so as for vendors, here's a couple of vendors for you guys as well. Keep in mind, this is once again not all of them. So you get something like Sony, which is now obviously for PlayStations. You get Microsoft, which is for Xboxes. And then, of course, we've got Nintendo, which is now for things like Wii and Switch. Man, I wish I could have all of these. That really sounds cool, doesn't it? Right, folks, so that concludes Unit 1. Let's move on to Unit 2, which is using a workstation. Right, folks, the first topic in this unit is going to be setting up a personal computer. In other words, setting up your PC. The very first thing I want you guys to go and do when it comes to setting up your PC is to go and check the contents. So if you just bought yourself a computer or you just moved it, check if you've got all the components before you start, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to put a PC together only to come to the conclusion later that something is actually missing. So check, do you have the screen? Do you have the computer box, the keyboard, the mouse, and all the cables you might possibly require? This includes, but is not limited to, your video cable. So this could be an HDMI cable, could be a VGA cable, a DVI cable. The point is, do you have a video cable from the box to the screen? Do you have a power cable for the box? Do you have a power cable for the screen? If this is a wireless mouse or a wireless keyboard, do you have batteries in them? That kind of stuff. Check if you've got all the contents. Secondly, read the instructions. This is now assuming there actually is any. And I think this will also depend on your level of experience at this point in time. So depending on how much experience you've got, you may or may not want to read the instructions, assuming there are some. If it's a new PC, you might be lucky enough to get some. Not a new PC, then you probably won't have any that tells you anything. Thirdly, guys, position the devices and the cables. So go find yourself a nice little space where you can go and set up your PC, preferably on a desk, obviously. When you set up this computer of yours, you want to make sure you've got enough room to work with, so that if you want to work on documents, anything like that, you've got enough room for that. You also want to check airflow and trip hazards and usability and all that kinds of stuff when it comes to setting up your PC. So first of all, check trip hazards. So if you're gonna have cables, you don't want to have them just lying around, underneath the table, because there's a pretty good chance you might trip on those sooner or later. Maybe your foot will get caught in one of them, and you're gonna rip the cables out, and you're gonna cause some damage. So check for trip hazards. Maybe you do a little cable management. You can use cable ties. Get lots of other things on the market that'll make your cables look neat and tidy. Secondly, folks, airflow. What am I talking about? Well, guys, if you look at the back of your computer box and on the sides, you'll find air vents. Some of them are sucking air in, some of them are blowing air out. Now, it's very important you make sure that these air vents are not obstructed. So if there's an air vent, don't go and put it exactly against the wall, because that's going to prevent it from blowing air out or sucking air in. So depending on where the air vents is, that'll dictate how you need to go and position your box. Lastly, folks, the usability. It doesn't help you've got a keyboard and a mouse and a screen and all that on the table, but the angle is just, ugh. The angle is not so nice, and the keyboard and the mouse is not a nice location. So it is important that obviously you need to be comfortable using this machine. Alright, then you're going to move on to connecting these peripherals if you haven't done so already. The good news here, guys, is the majority of these things work with cables that can only go in one place. So if you look at something like the video cable, it can, generally speaking, only go into one hole at the back of the case. Same can be said about many other peripherals. So generally, if it fits into a hole, then it's probably meant to go into that hole. If it's not meant to go into a hole, then it probably won't allow you to put it into that hole. As simple as that. Then you need to go and connect your power cables. The last thing you go and connect is the power cables. And then the very, very last thing you do is to go and turn on the power. You never do any work on a computer or go and fiddle with any cables while the machine is on. You always go and turn it off. You always go plug out the power cables. And when it comes to putting it back together, you just do it in reverse. You plug in everything, followed by second lastly, plugging in the power cables, and then very lastly, turning on the power. That leaves us at the last step, which is what? To turn on the power. Alright, folks, let's move on to the next topic, signing into Windows. Now, if you have just installed Windows, you would find there's probably going to be only one account on that machine. And you normally just need to click on it. You may or may not need to go and type in the password. You actually can have the ability to go and have a blank password if it's just been installed in Windows. This would be called a workgroup scenario. And you would then log in. Now, if this machine is in a company environment, chances are it has possibly been joined to what we call a domain. And what happens in that situation is you would normally be required to go and type in your username, not to click on an account. You're going to actually have to go and type in your company username. It's probably going to be your name, your last name, or a combination of the two, followed by a password. And in a domain environment, you must have a password. It's not an option to have a blank password in that situation. Now, once you log in, that is called authentication, something we'll get to in just a second. Now, when you start your machine, folks, when you press the power button on that laptop or desktop, especially on a desktop machine, you're going to hear a very short beep. At least that's what we want to hear, is one short beep. A lot of you guys have probably heard this, but you never really paid attention to it. Did you know that that short beep that your PC makes, you'll especially hear this on desktop machines, is actually a code? It's more specifically called a BIOS code. Your computer is giving you a code. It's giving you the all clear. You want to hear one short beep. If you hear anything other than one short beep, let's say lots of rapid beeps or long continuous beeps or a combination of long and short beeps, anything other than one short beep, that is bad. That is your machine telling you that something is wrong. Usually that something is wrong with the hardware. Now, this whole concept is called the power on self test. Most of us just call this POST, P-O-S-T. It looks like it's one word, but it's actually an abbreviation for power on self test. So when you press the power button, in a matter of like 1 or 2 seconds, your machine is actually going to go and check if all the hardware is in good working order and if it's all present, and if it's all there and that kinds of stuff. So you're gonna basically imagine a person with a clipboard saying, "Hello, RAM, are you there?" And the RAM's gonna say, "Yes, I'm here. I'm in working condition." It's gonna say, "Okay, check." Hard drive, are you there? Hard drive's gonna say, "Yes, I'm here. I'm in good working condition." It's gonna say, "CPU, are you there?" CPU is gonna say, "Yes, I'm here in good working condition." It's gonna keep going on like that, and obviously after 1 second or 2 seconds, everything's gonna check out. If the whole checklist checks out, you're gonna get one short beep, which means everything is in working order, and the machine would start, and you're gonna land on the password sign-in screen, which is what we see on the screen right now. Now, should one of these hardwares not check in, let's say it is missing, malfunctioning, then you're going to get some sort of code, which we call a BIOS beeping code. Not really something that's covered in this specific course. That's actually beyond the levels of this course. That's more A plus territory, which is the next course after this one. But it's going to give you a code which indicates what exactly is wrong with the machine. There are certain hardware components, however, in your machine that would not give you a code if there's something wrong. To give you an idea what this might be, this could possibly be the motherboard. The motherboard, guys, is the item that's got the speaker on it. And if the motherboard is the faulty culprit, it will not be able to make the sound that goes beep and tells you something is wrong because, well, that is the item that's obviously broken. Another component that will not generate a beeping code is the power supply. If the power supply is faulty, that means you don't have power. No power equals no sound, So it's kind of a catch-22 if you think about it. All right, so back on to authentication. Authentication, for those of you that don't know, is the concept of proving you are who you claim to be or you are what you claim to be. In this instance, I think let's just say you are who you claim to be. You are the owner to this device or you are the owner to this account. Now, the way you prove your identity is normally an email address and a password, a username and a password, if it's something you know. It could possibly be something you've got physically on your person, which is the second category. This could be a card of some kind, bank card, smart card, thumb card, or a thumb itself. It could even be a device like a smartphone or a tablet, because on this device you'd receive an OTP, which is a one-time PIN, or you would need to do some sort of acknowledgement on some sort of app. Either way, the device still represents something you've got physically on your person. A third category I can give you is something that you are. This is normally biometric. This could be a fingerprint or a biometric eye scan, maybe voice recognition, facial recognition, all that kinds of stuff. It is generally biometric in nature. So I've given you guys 3 categories, but just know that there's not just 3 categories. So it could be something you know, it could be something that you've got, or it could be something that you are. All of those are ways or means for you to prove you are who you claim to be. And then obviously if you've proven your identity, it's going to log in and it's going to give you access to this account or this device in question. Right, folks, moving on. Using the desktop and the taskbar. All right, so for this, I think it's going to be better if I don't just show you screenshots. I mean, yes, I'm going to show you screenshots, but I'm not just going to show you screenshots. I think I'm also going to log into what we call a virtual computer, and I'm going to show you guys actually where these things are and what they look like. So a virtual computer, for those of you that don't know, is exactly like a real computer, except it's virtual. It's not a real computer, but you can log into it like a real computer, and you can do everything on it like a real computer, just doesn't have its own physical hardware. Nothing you can see or touch. So it basically idles in the background on your real computer and eats the resource of a real computer. It's kind of like a virus, actually, if you think about it, but it's not. It's not a virus. All right, so with regards to your desktop and taskbar, guys, let's first talk about desktop shortcuts. Now, if you look at the screenshot we've got in front of us, it unfortunately doesn't have any real desktop icons in it, not anything visible anyway. So if you look at the top left, you can see the recycle bin, you can see Microsoft Edge sticking out there. So where it says number 1, basically, that is, well, your desktop icons. I'll show you guys that a little bit more properly in just a moment once we go to the virtual machine. If you double click on one of these icons, you have to click on it twice very quickly. It'll open the component, whatever that might be. It's going to launch it. Now that, folks, is not the only way to launch stuff, and you can also go and add a shortcut to your taskbar. If you don't know what the taskbar is, that is at the bottom. So way at the bottom, you'll see there's a search bar that is white. The rest of it is black. It's got the time and the date there. That is your taskbar. The taskbar will show you what you currently have open. So if you've just opened a program, a document, or a game, in the taskbar, it'll indicate what you've got open and how many of that certain item you've got open. Now you can also go and add icons for programs in your taskbar, so they're going to be pinned there permanently. And if you click on it, you don't have to double click on it, just click on it once, it'll open the item in question. As for the start menu, now if you look at Windows 10, which is about to be phased out sometime soon, at the bottom left is where you'll find a little icon that looks like a Windows flag. If you click on that, it'll open the start menu. And that is actually what we see in the screenshot, by the way. So the whole screenshot, for the most part, has got the start menu open. You'll find we've got all those tiles and stuff. And once again, this is going to make more sense to you guys once I switch over to the virtual machine. So I think on that note, let me switch over to the virtual machine and show you guys this.
A few moments later.
Alright folks, here we are on what we call my virtual machine. So this is a Windows 10 operating system machine. The first thing I covered just a moment ago was the desktop icons. So if you don't know what a desktop icon is, that there, you can see there it says recycle bin. That, guys, is technically a desktop icon. That there, which is actually an empty folder, also an icon. So as time goes by, you're going to be installing various programs, various games. You're going to be dropping various folders and various documents and stuff on your desktop. The desktop is this main screen which you land on, by the way. So all I need to do is I just need to double click on this. You just click on it 2 times very quickly, and it's going to launch the item. So in this case, that was a folder. If I go and click on that item twice very quickly, which is known as a double click, there we go. It's going to open the item in question. So if that was a program or if that was a game, it would have opened the program or the game in question. So that is the desktop icons. Now at my discretion, I can go and pin some of these items to the taskbar. The taskbar is this item here at the bottom. So you can see if I drag it down here, it says pin to File Explorer, or I can go and pin it here to the taskbar. In my case, it says Explorer. But that's generally what's going to happen is you're going to go and pin it. So you can see here, they actually went and pinned this icon here. That's the Internet Explorer, or Edge in this case. It's basically just a shortcut way of getting to some of these items. So yeah, there we go, guys. That is your taskbar. Shows you what's open on the machine. Shows you the date and the time here on the right-hand side. Nothing too fancy. There's a search bar, allows you to search your machine. And if I click on this icon at the bottom left, that is your start button for the start menu. So if I click on that and I open it up, there is my start menu. Now, all the stuff is organized alphabetically in this start menu. These are known as tiles. Now, you don't actually get these anymore if you're going to be using Windows 11. Windows 11 has got a start menu which actually pops up here in the middle. It doesn't use tiles, it uses icons again. But for now, we're talking about Windows 10. Let me just open it again. I can actually go and drag these tiles and rearrange them. I can go and resize them, make them bigger, make them smaller. I can actually go and right click on one of these and unpin them from the start menu if I need to. Now, just because I unpin them does not necessarily mean they're uninstalled, guys. It's simply going to remove the icon for that item in question from this main menu. But if I scroll in the menu here on the left, you will still find it. So the idea here is, of the menu on the right, is to pin the items that you use most frequently. Any game or program or document that you use a lot, in other words, very frequently, that you would go and pin to the start menu. And if it's something you don't use that often, then feel free to go and remove it from the start menu so you can go and add anything else to your start menu. You also get what we call live tiles, not actually something you need to know in this particular course. A live tile is, if you look at the picture of that tile, which we call the thumbnail, if you look at the picture, it'll show you information about something without actually clicking on it and without actually opening that item. So this could be, for example, a weather tile. Maybe on the tile, it'll indicate the chances of rain for the day, the maximum and the minimum temperatures expected for the day, the wind speed for the day. It's going to show you that information on the tile, on the picture of the tile, the thumbnail, without you actually clicking on it. And if I were to go click on the weather tile, it's going to go into the application in question and it's going to show me way more information. So that's considered a live tile. I'm only using the weather tile as an example, but obviously it's not limited to a weather tile, guys. Alright, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Let's go back to that presentation. Alright, moving on to a mouse or a touchpad. Now, they both serve the same purpose. They both kind of sort of do the same thing. It's just when it comes to using them, that might be a little different from one to the next. So guys, there's a bit of a picture obviously on the screen as to what a touchpad looks like. I'm not going to put a picture of a mouse because, well, we all know what a computer's mouse looks like. Now, with regard to the touchpad, the idea is for you to put your finger on that, and when you move your finger around on that, obviously when the machine is on, of course, you're going to see the mouse cursor moving around on the screen. Pretty much the exact same concept is going to happen when you go and touch the mouse or hold the mouse in your palm of your hand and you move it around. You're going to see the cursor moving around on the screen. Now with a mouse, if you want to select something, you would press down on the left button. At least that's the default setting. You can go and change that. Same applies to a laptop. So it's got two buttons, one on the left, one on the right, and it's got a wheel in the middle. If you press on the button on the left, that's considered a left click. If you press on the button on the right, that is considered a right click. If you need to double click something, in other words, click on it twice very quickly so you can open the item or select the item, that'll be a left click that you need to go and do twice. Now with touchpads, how this works is you're going to move your finger on the touchpad until you see the cursor over the icon in question or the item in question that you want to go and select. And you're going to tap on the touchpad quickly twice. That would indicate that this is a click. Now, alternatively, what you can also go and do is you'll find often directly below the touchpad is a left click button and a right click button. So that's for people that struggles with the touchpad. I actually used to be one of those people. So if you're struggling with the touchpad to do a click, you just move the mouse cursor to where you want it to be. And then using the buttons below the touchpad, the left button is left click, the right button is right click, you can go and do what we call a click. If you want to go and use a shortcut menu, same story. You're going to have to go and right click. So on the mouse, you right click someplace. This would be something like the desktop, something we showed you earlier. You can right click on something like the desktop, and this can be done with the right button on the mouse, or the button on the touchpad will be the bottom right one. So on your touchpad, bottom right button, you press on that. That'll indicate that it's a right click, and that's normally going to go and open what we call a shortcut menu. If you want to drag and drop something, in other words, move something from one location to another location, this could possibly be a folder or an icon. Let's imagine for a moment this is on the desktop. So if you're on the desktop like I showed you guys earlier, you're going to hover the cursor with your touchpad or your mouse over the item that you want to drag, whether this is an icon or a folder. Once you're satisfied that your cursor for your mouse is now over the item in question, you're going to press down on the left click button. So if you're using a mouse, you're going to press down on the button, you're going to hold in the button, and you're going to move the mouse, and that's you're going to see it's actually going to move the mouse cursor along of this item. And eventually, once you release the button, wherever the mouse cursor is at that point in time, it's going to drop the item right there. Touchpad, it's a little bit more tricky than the mouse. So this is something you guys are going to have to practice to get the hang of it. So for touchpad, you're going to have to double click on it twice, and then while doing so, you're going to have to move the mouse using the touchpad. Now, it sounds a heck of a lot easier, guys, than what it actually is. Once you get the hang of it, you're going to laugh at yourself, for struggling with this. But in the beginning, quite something difficult to get a hold of. As for scrolling, guys, so on the mouse, once again, this is easier if you're using an actual mouse. So if you are on a menu that's a very long menu, you can use the mouse wheel to scroll up and down the menu. Pretty easy and pretty straightforward. As for using a touchpad, this can somewhat be a little tricky. So you're going to have to look for what we call a little scroll bar. So normally on the right hand side, you're going to find a scroll bar. You're going to have to click on this scroll bar, and you're going to have to drag on the scroll bar to move up and down the menu. So this is quite tricky with a touchpad, which is why you'll find most people will go and plug in a mouse, an external desktop mouse into the laptop, because it just makes working a lot easier. But if you don't have a mouse nearby, maybe just because you're on the go, maybe you don't have money for a mouse, you lost the mouse, you broke the mouse, whatever the case might be, then at least you've got a touchpad as a backup. Right, folks, let's talk about keyboards, more specifically using a keyboard. Now, the picture that you're going to be seeing on the screen is going to be of a desktop keyboard, not a laptop keyboard, but pretty much everything I'm going to be telling you is applicable to laptop keyboards as well. I want to go as far as to say 90 to 95% of what I'm going to tell you also applies to laptop keyboards. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Typing ordinary text. Okay, so how do we type, or where should you hold your fingers and your hands when you are about to go and type? So that brings us to touch typing finger positions. Guys, if you are about to type on a keyboard, whether it be a laptop or a desktop keyboard, there's a certain place you can go and hold your hand, your fingers, or certain places for you to be able to reach all the keys in question. So for the left hand, you're going to hold it on the left side of the keyboard. And your left finger, your pinky, is going to be on the letter A. The finger next to your pinky, your ring finger, would normally be on S. Your middle finger will be on D. And your index finger for the left hand will be on the letter F. As for your right hand, on the right hand, your index finger will be on the letter J, middle finger on the letter K, your ring finger on the letter L, and your pinky will be on a two dots or dot comma, that little icon there. Now that, guys, is where your hands needs to be. That is the position for your fingers, or the positions for your fingers. And now you're ready to go and type. You'll notice in that position, your fingers are actually able to reach the majority of the keys on the keyboard. And this applies to laptop keyboards as well as desktop keyboards. Now, most of us won't necessarily go and hold our hands exactly like that, but that is a good place to start to learn when you're still new to this. Let's move on to the keyboard layout. Believe it or not all keyboards are the same, especially when it comes to laptop keyboards. Laptops, you'll find some of them have got what we call a numeric keypad. So on the right hand side, if you look at that keyboard picture we've got there, on the right hand side, you'll see like a divider, a multiplier, a minus, a plus, bunch of numbers. That is your numeric keypad. Desktop keyboards, almost all of them have that. Laptop keyboards, no, not all of them have that. You're lucky if you've got that on a laptop. It might have it, it might not have it. Also, regarding the layout of a keyboard, you get different standards of keyboards, and I'm not talking about having a numeric keypad or not, or the size of the keypad. It's in general where you would find which keys. So if you look at your letters, the arrangement of your letters, the very top, very left letter on your keyboard, right next to the tab key, for the average keyboard will be the letter Q. And on the right of that, you'll find the letter W. On the right of that, you'll find the letter E. On the right of that, you'll find R, followed by T, followed by Y. Now, if you read that out, it spells or reads out as QWERTY. This is known as a QWERTY keyboard. The majority of us and the majority of countries use what we call a QWERTY keyboard. So that means the letters are where you would find them, or if you go to different countries, you would find letters in the same place. So if I go from country A to country B, the letters will be in the same place on the keyboard. But if one country is using a QWERTY keyboard as their standard, and the second country is not, that's going to be basically throw a spanner in the works. So for the person that's moving between these two countries, I'm not saying they won't be able to type, but it's going to be quite difficult to figure out where what is, because it's not where you're used to them being. Now let's move on to what we call command keys. These are for the most part special keys that does special functions on the keyboard. So the first one up is enter, which is also known as the return key, but most of us just call it the enter key. So that's probably one of the biggest keys you'll find on a keyboard besides the spacebar. It's generally located in the middle towards the right. You'll find a big enter. So that is to enter your command. So if you just typed something and you want to acknowledge or confirm or enter your command, you're going to smash the enter key. Then you also get something we call the control key and the alt key. Now, on almost all keyboards, you would find this on the bottom left. The one way at the bottom left on the keyboard will be your control key. And then you're going to find one or two keys in between that. And then you're going to find the alt key at the bottom left next to your spacebar. Now, depending on how big your keyboard is, especially on desktop keyboards, you might potentially actually have yourself two control keys or even two alt keys. So that's normally going to be on the right hand side of your spacebar, on the left of your arrow keys. Now, speaking of arrow keys, let's talk about the tab key and the arrow key. So the tab key, top left, right next to the letter Q. So it's going to be on the left of the letter Q. So the tab key's got lots of functions. I mean, you can go make big spaces with the tab key. You can move different lines. Serves many functions. And then right below that tab key, you'll find what we call the caps lock key. So that is to convert your letters to uppercase. If you're typing on a keyboard, whatever letter you press will be in uppercase by default. And if you go and tap the caps lock key again, you're going to be in lowercase mode. So every key or letter, I should say, that you're going to be pressing on a keyboard will be in lowercase. And if you hold down the shift key, which is below the caps lock key, basically achieves the same result, but you kind of have to hold that key down while pressing the letter in question. So if I'm currently in lowercase mode, so every letter I press will be in lowercase, and I hold down the shift key and I press on a letter, any letter, that letter will not come out in lowercase. It specifically will come out in uppercase. As long as I hold down the shift key, it's going to come out the opposite. And if you're currently in uppercase mode and you hold the shift key down, it's going to achieve the opposite result. Now, the shift key is also what you can go and use to, well, obtain special characters. So if you look on a standard keyboard, right above the letter keys, you'll find a bunch of numbers from 1 to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 0. Now, on those same keys, you'll find special symbols above the numbers. To get these special symbols, or to make these special symbols, the average person would hold down the shift key. So if I just press, let's say, the number 5, I'm going to get the number 5. But if you look at the number 5, you'll find on most keyboards it's going to show you the percentage sign. So if I want to get the percentage sign, I would have to hold down the shift key to get the percentage sign. Pretty cool, don't you think? As for the arrow keys, guys, bottom right, you'll find them on laptop and desktop keys. They speak for themselves. It moves up, down, left, right, that kinds of stuff. Shift key, I have explained that to you guys. We know what the num lock and the keypad is, or numeric keypad is. So on the right of your keyboard, if you're lucky to have this numeric keypad, keep in mind laptops don't always have this, you'll find a bunch of numbers on the right hand side as well, with a plus, a minus, a divider, and a multiplier. Now that keyboard is not always engaged, the numeric one. Sometimes you need to press the key there in that area which says num lock. Now that means the numeric keypad is locked. It'll either work or it will not work depending on whether you press the num lock key. Then we've got a key which is known as the start key. It is also known as the Windows key. You can find this on both laptops and desktop keyboards. On desktop keyboards, you'll find potentially 2 of these keys, but laptops, generally there's just 1. It's normally located at the bottom left, right next to your control. It's between your control and your alt key, the bottom left. It's normally got the Windows flag icon on it. And if you press on that, it'll open the start menu. Then we've got what we call function keys. More commonly, you would find these on laptop keyboards instead of desktop keyboards. I know it's kind of weird. Normally, we find more functions on desktop keyboards, but function keys is something that's actually more common on laptop keyboards. The reason for that is because generally, laptop keyboards are smaller. There's less keys. So using less keys, we've got to achieve the same result as a desktop keyboard. Now to do that, since we've got less keys or less space for keys, we're going to use the same key to do 2 things or 3 things. And to get the other functions out of that key, since it can now do 2 or 3 things, we would have to hold down an extra key, which we call the function key. Where you find this key could vary, from laptop to laptop, but generally it's located somewhere at the bottom left of most keyboards. It's normally labeled as FN in most cases. FN for function. So this function key, you'll notice quite often is also in a different color. So where most of your keys will have white font on them, or white ink on them, you'll find the function key will probably be blue or red or purple, some different colors to distinguish between the rest. And in all of these other keys of yours, which is now normally going to have white ink on them, you'll also find there's going to be a special symbol or something on them which is in a different color. To get that special symbol or that special something, whatever it might be, that special function even, you're going to have to hold down the function key, which is going to, well, basically make that function engage. And then the very last item I want to cover with you guys with regards to the keyboard, then we can move on, is the backspace and delete. So backspace is something you'll find generally right above your enter key, something we discussed in the beginning. It's basically like an eraser. So if you type something and you made a boo-boo, you just press the backspace. Once it's going to erase generally 1 character. Now, the backspace is to delete 1 character, where delete could entirely delete something entirely. It could delete a whole folder, a whole icon, a whole document. So be careful what you select when you're about to press the delete button, because it might not even ask you if you're sure you want to go and delete this item. It might just outright delete the item in question. So delete is generally the more scary one of the two. It's the more risky one out of the two, so use that of caution, folks. Right, moving on. Let's talk about using a touch screen. Now, I'm fairly certain the majority of you guys watching this video have worked with a touchscreen. It might just be a matter if you haven't thought of it. So if you look at the average smartphone these days, which, let's face it, most of us have got these things, those things for the most part work with touchscreen, guys. So smartphones, tablets, those are probably the most common device that you'll be using that's got a touchscreen. But in case you didn't know, you do get computer screens that are actually touchscreen as well. So if you've got enough money for a fancy laptop, you might very well be lucky enough to actually have a screen on that laptop, which is also a touch screen. So never mind having to use the keyboard, the mouse, or the touchpad, you can actually, in fact, touch on the screen of the laptop. I'm personally not a big fan of this because it always makes a mess on my screen. Half the time I can't see what the heck I'm looking at because of sticky fingerprints and whatnot. But some people might like that. When you get those big computer screens, which is basically an all-in-one, kind of like those all-in-one computers that we spoke of at the beginning of this video. So everything is compact in the screen. The motherboard, the computer, the whole shebang, everything is in that screen. Now you do get some of these screens that are actually touchscreen on some of these computers, and this is most common in a place like let me see, maybe like a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant, coffee shop, those kinds of places, you'll find in some of these the waiter or the waitress, when they place your order or you're about to go and pay your bill, whatever the case might be, they'll go to a screen, they'll go and press on it and punch on it and do all kinds of things on it, and that is usually a computer. It is a touch screen computer. And when it comes to these touch screens we've been talking about so much, guys, they obviously work with what we call gesture support and on-screen keyboards. So gesture support means you can go and drag on it, you can go and pinch, you can go and stretch, you can do all kinds of things on the screen that'll get it to do what you need it to do. You can even open an on-screen keyboard if need be. Now, with regards to these gestures, in case you're wondering, a couple of gestures you might get would be something like to go and tap. Pressing once is the same as using the left mouse click button, guys. You can go and tap and hold, which is the same as right mouse click. You can go and pinch and stretch, which is something we do all the time on phone screens and whatnot. So that will be pinch together to zoom in, or move apart. If you move your fingers apart, that'll be zooming out or zooming in. And then, of course, you get swipe. I mean, we do swiping all the time on our phones. So swiping from a particular screen edge performs different actions, something you guys would have noticed by now on your phones most likely. Swiping within an app window can also perform custom actions. And then lastly, folks, something you probably would have seen as well, swiping down from the top of the app window usually refreshes the content. This applies to a lot of apps. So if you are, for example, inside your email on your phone and you hold your finger way at the top of this app and you swipe down, that'll refresh your email and check if there's any new email that you might have missed. All right, moving on to recognizing desktop icons. Now, earlier in this video, I did show you guys what a desktop icon looks like. I showed it to you guys in a picture. We even went to that virtual machine of mine. And on the virtual machine, I showed you guys the recycle bin icon, and I also made random folders on the desktop. Those are icons. Now, what we're going to have in front of us is just a couple of different icons. It's not just a folder or a recycle bin. It's a couple of different ones. So the first one up is a file. Now, here is an example of what a file may or may not look like. Now, that, guys, is a Word document. That's the one that comes with this course. That's the one I've got to explain to you guys. But I want to make it clear that in real life, it's not just limited to Word documents. If you don't know what a Word document is, that's a certain type of application we use. It's a Microsoft Office application. And we use that for basic Office document compilation. So yeah, Word is just one. I mean, you can go and use an Excel document. This could potentially be a normal TXT document. In other words, a text document. You get so many different kinds of documents, but it's a file. Then you get a shortcut. So a shortcut is going to look very much the same, but if you look closely, you'll see the icon is slightly smaller compared to a normal icon, and it's got a little arrow indication at the bottom left. So that is not the actual file or the actual document or the actual program icon. It's a shortcut to it. Then we have folders, something I did show you guys earlier in my demonstration when we went onto that virtual machine of mine. So a folder will look something like this. It's going to be yellow. It may or may not be blank inside. So the ones I had earlier were blank. But if there happens to be one or more files in there, you'll find in the icon, kind of like this one, it'll show you an example of what might possibly be in there. So in this case, we can see there's a couple of Word files in there. Then we have what we call the applications. There is an example of an application icon. That is something I did show you guys earlier. It might not have been exactly that one. The one I showed you guys was the recycle bin. So an application icon would look something like that. And in this case, if I were to double click on that, it would launch the actual application, which in this case is Word. Then we've got random devices on the machine. I mean, you get so many, guys. I'm going to give you guys a couple of icons here. Obviously, it's definitely not limited to just this. So the one on the left is an icon for a hard drive. The one in the middle is an icon for your optical drive. So a CD-ROM drive, a DVD-ROM drive, a Blu-ray drive. The one way on the right will be an icon for your printer. Right, guys, and then the last topic for Unit 2, and then we're going to be moving on to Unit 3. The last topic for Unit 2 is working with Windows. Now, we did very briefly do this earlier, when I did my little demonstration on virtual machines. So we're going to take it a little bit further than earlier. So I'm going to switch back over to the virtual machine, and we're going to work with Windows a little bit. Just the basics to give you a bit of an overview. And then we'll move on to Unit 3. All right, so let's switch over.
A few moments later.
Right, folks, here we are back on our virtual machine from earlier. You can see I still have the same icons and all that, blah, blah, blah. So in case you don't remember, this is the desktop. Now, obviously, you can go and change this wallpaper in the background to whatever you want. This is the default one that comes with Windows 10. If you need to find something on your machine and you don't know where it is, you can go and use the search bar we've got here at the bottom. This is actually known as Cortana on Windows 10. So not only will that search engine search your machine locally for what you've got actually on that machine, but it will actually also go and search the internet if you happen to be connected to the internet. So if I, for example, go and type in what is the temperature and I go and mention my respective area, it will in fact actually show you what the temperature is in your area. This is now once again assuming you are connected to the internet. Now, what you can also go and do if you're looking for something specific is you can go click here on the start button, like we said earlier. This will open the start menu. Depending on what you've pinned, you may or may not find what you're looking for here between these tiles on the start menu. Alternatively, you can go and browse in this little start menu. So I can go here to all apps. I can go to File Explorer. This will allow me to explore my PC. So this is called Explorer. Another way to open the Explorer, in case you're wondering, let me just close this up for you guys again, is if you go click on this little folder icon here at the bottom. That opens what is known as File Explorer. Sometimes we just call that Explorer. Some folks call that Windows Explorer. The point is, it's called Explorer. Now that is what essentially allows you as the user, or your users in general, to browse the machine. So if I need to go into my pictures, my videos, my music, my documents, my whatever, the Explorer is what you use to, well, explore the machine. So I can now go and double click on the pictures folder, and I can go and explore that and see whatever is inside. I can go and double click on any of these other folders, or even if I made a custom folder. There's my recycle bin. This little navigation menu here on the left shows you little shortcuts to certain areas of your machine. So various areas. And I can go into any one of these areas now. I can go and right click here if I want to. It gives me a bit of a menu. You would remember earlier we said if we right click, it gives you a shortcut menu. So this is a shortcut menu. Gives me a bunch of options. One of the options you've got to your disposal here is this one here. It says new. And I can now, for example, go and make a new folder. If I click on that, makes a new folder. At the moment, it's currently selected, which means I can change the name if I want to at this point in time. Or I can leave it on the default, which is literally just the name new folder. If I click here in the blank space, it's going to accept that default name, which is new folder. And at any point in time, I can always go back in there, just double click on the name, and it's going to allow me to change the name. You can also go right click on that sucker, go click on the option that says rename, and that'll obviously allow you to rename the machine. Now, once again, regarding this menu here on the left, which is a shortcut menu, I can go click here where it says this PC, and if I click on that, there is the icons we saw earlier. So that is my floppy disk drive. I mean, God forbid if you still have one of those. I hope not. Nobody still uses those. There is an icon for my hard drive. Now, you will normally have at least one hard drive on your machine, whether you're using a laptop or a desktop. If you're using a desktop PC or even a server, you may or may not even have more than one hard drive. So that means more space for you. Here, that's an icon for an optical disk drive. So the moment I've got a disk in there, I can actually eject that so you can see what it looks like. Give it a moment. And that is what an optical disk would look like. So an optical disk drive. So my DVD-ROM drive, my CD-ROM drive, I can go and insert a DVD or a CD into that. Would it be physical or digital? Alright folks, so that's a bit of an overview of what it looks like when you browser on your machine. More on that later. Alright folks, so that is a bit of an overview of what it looks like when you browse around on your computer and you go and fiddle a bit. Now let's move on to the third unit in this module, which is using an operating system. The first topic I'm going to take you guys through in this unit is functions of an operating system. So basic everyday functions. For example, let's start with interface between the user and the computer. So for those of you that don't know, the operating system is an interface between you and the computer, or between the user and the computer. It's what allows you or the user to use this great machine, which we call a computer. Otherwise, if we don't have an operating system, you would just have a bunch of hardware which is, well, useless. You can have no way or no means to control this hardware. Now, what operating system you or the user decide to install, that's up to you. There's many to go and choose from, Windows just being one of them, and even in Windows alone, you guys probably would have seen or heard by now, there's many to go and choose from. The two latest ones being, of course, Windows 10 and Windows 11 at the moment, and going forward, there's probably going to be more and more and more. Alright, so the operating system is usually, not always, but usually a graphical user interface, which we call a GUI for short. Now, guys, this was not always the case. If you go back in time to the early 90s and even before that, we had operating systems. Yes, we had them. And they did allow us to control the machine and its hardware, but they were not graphical. It was command based. So you would basically, back in the day, see a black screen, for lack of a better description, and you would use only a keyboard, and you had to know the commands to be able to, well, interact with this machine and to control this machine. Not a lot of people had machines back then because they were obviously very expensive. You basically had to sell your sister to afford one, and you couldn't really do with them as much as we can do nowadays. Now, we're actually very lucky, guys. These days, machines have become so darn gosh user friendly that you can now go and use a mouse, you can go and see a graphical interface, and you can interact with the machine, and you can do a heck of a lot more than what we could do back in the day. Now, like I said, you also used to get a command line interface operating system back in the day. Fortunately for us, yeah, we don't really have to go and deal with that now anymore, now do we? Alright, so as for the interface between the applications and the actual hardware itself, so we have a fair understanding of what the operating system now is, but the interface between the applications running on the operating system and the hardware, that there's a few things we need to discuss. First of all, guys, this could be 32-bit or 64-bit. I wouldn't worry about it too much at this point in time, and we are doing fundamentals here after all. But if any of you guys decide to go and take this further and you decide to go and do something like the CompTIA A+ course, I am going to encourage you guys to be familiar with what 32-bit is, what 64-bit is, what the difference between these two are, because they will ask you about that in the A+ exam. As for the ITF Plus exam, don't worry about it. If you know what it is, you understand the difference between them, great for you. That's a bonus. Now, 32-bit, guys, is old technology. A lot of us call this legacy technology, which means it's old. So up until about, if I have to shoot out of the hip here, up until about 2013, 14, give or take a year or so, we used 32-bit. And from there was basically a shift in the market where we started switching over to 64-bit because it's just better. It is better in pretty much any way you can imagine. But just to give you one example, 32-bit operating systems are limited with the amount of RAM you can have. That would be your system memory. So if you have, for example, 8 gigs of RAM installed, being your system memory, and if you're using a 32-bit operating system, you would only be able to use about 3 to 4 gigs of that 8 gig. The operating system would actually tell you only 3 point blah 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 is usable out of that 8 gig. I mean, don't you think that sucks? I mean, having 8 gigs and not being able to use all of it, I mean, that's just not nice. Now, if you've got yourself a 64-bit operating system, you're not going to sort of that nonsense of an issue. Now, speaking of issues, Another issue we may or may not face, and this is unfortunately a very common problem, is application compatibility. This especially takes place when we start switching over to newer operating systems. So at this point in time, when I'm making this video, majority of companies are still using Windows 10. So I would say about 80% of the market are using Windows 10 if we're coming at this from a Microsoft perspective. And only a mere 10 to maybe 15% are using Windows 11. There's a good reason for that, but I'm not going to go into that. Now, eventually, when people decide to switch over to Windows 11, what's going to happen is there's often applications that only work on Windows 10. They were designed with Windows 10 in mind. Nothing new on the market. They were not designed for anything newer on the market like Windows 11 and anything that comes beyond that. So it's a bit of a problem. So these companies, sometimes they need that application. There might be nothing else on the market that they can substitute that application with. But at the same time, they need to switch over to Windows 11. So there's quite a bit of a pickle of a situation to find yourself in. And there's quite a few things we can do to remedy this situation. I'm not going to go into it too much because once again, this is fundamentals. But one of the things you can go and do, and this actually does not just apply to applications, is you can go and right click on the icon of that application. So if it's on your desktop, you right click on it, you go and choose the option that says run compatibility mode 4. So it's a drop down list. In this drop down list, folks, it's going to give you a list of some of the previous operating systems they used to be, before the current one that you've got right now. And if this application of yours, if you know for a fact it used to work on, let's say, Windows 7 or 8 or 10, and you're currently running 11, well, you just choose the operating system in the list which you know it used to run on, and then if you're lucky, it'll run the next time you launch it. Now, this is not set in stone that it's gonna work, guys. Microsoft will probably like you to believe that it's gonna work every time. I can tell you guys now, it's not gonna work every time. It's only about a 50% success rate, but you've got nothing to lose. I mean, if the application is already not working, then you might as well go and try. I mean, what do you have to lose, right? All right. And then, guys, let's talk about system health and functionality. It's very important to keep your system healthy and functional. Now, what we mean by that is you need to keep your system up to date, guys. It's extremely important to always have the latest updates for your machine. The same applies for any security software you may or may not have installed. So if you've got yourself an antivirus installed, you absolutely need to make sure you keep that thing up to date. And if you get any weird funky software installed on this machine, some sort of malware, then you ideally want to try and remove that as quickly as possible before it does some sort of damage. There's many tools you can go and use to check the health of your system, guys, besides something like an antivirus. And some of these tools we are going to discuss in this course, and ironically, they are discussed later in this very module we're in right now. And when it comes to data management, so that would be the safeguarding of your data, making sure it's not lost or stolen and all that. So one of the things we can go and do to help with that is to go and back up the data. How you do that, that's up to you. It's going to vary from company to company and from person to person, but it's very important you always go and back up any data that you feel might be important. It's also very important you make sure that this data is secure. So wherever possible, go and put passwords. Go and use encryption. Go and use the concept of least privilege. Now that means you never give someone or something more privilege or permission than what they need to achieve a task or a goal. It's not just because we don't trust these people, but it's also in case their accounts get compromised. So in the event of someone's account getting compromised, maybe they got hacked, then at least we know we're going to limit the amount of damage that hacker can do, and we're going to limit the amount of things that hacker can see with that account. We're not saying we're going to stop them, absolutely not, but at least we can make it very difficult for them. We don't want to hand it to them on a silver platter, now do we? All right, moving on. Workstation, server, and mobile device operating systems. Okay, so I'm going to start you guys off with workstation operating system. So that would be your laptop, your desktop, what you personally would be using or what the user would be using on their own personal machine. So under workstation operating systems, the ones that comes to mind will be things like Microsoft Windows, probably the biggest and the most well-known one in the market at the moment. And this does come obviously in many different editions and versions. We're not going to go into that just now. We also have something called Apple's operating system or Mac. We've got Linux. Some people pronounce this Linux, depends on which country you're from, I suppose. We've got Chrome operating system. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's also not bad. I suppose it depends on what you want to go and use it for. So that's a couple of ones I can give you guys with regards to workstations. It's not limited to those. You do get other ones out there. As for mobile device operating systems, we have what we call Apple's iOS operating system. A lot of us just call it iOS, but this is an operating system that's provided by Apple. And then we have Android. So this is an operating system provided by Google. So Android is Google's operating system for mobile devices. iOS is Apple's operating system for mobile devices. Now that's the only two that's actually mentioned in this course and covered in this course, but you do get many other ones out there. I mean, for example, if you go look at Huawei, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, they used to run Android on their phones and tablets and stuff. And then there was a bit of a dispute between America and China because Huawei is a Chinese company. And now Huawei had to go and, well, get their own operating system instead of using Android. They went and made one. I'm not going to promote it or demote it, but I am impressed by it, I've got to say. It looks actually very close to Android. So at first glance, you might very well think it is Android. That is just one of many other kinds of operating systems you get out there when it comes to phones and tablets. As for server operating systems, we of course have Windows Server. Once again, it comes in different editions and different versions. You have Linux, or some people call this Linux. We've got Unix, and we've got a few other ones as well, but those are the three main ones, guys. Right, I'm going to move you guys on to the next topic, virtualization. Now, unfortunately, virtualization, guys, is a very big topic. It's a very wide topic. It's like saying cloud. You know how big cloud is, how many things cloud could be. Or it's like saying IT. IT is such a vast field of so many things that it consists of. So, me to say virtualization could literally mean anything. But in this instance, I'm only talking about what is known as virtual machines. That is just one of many forms of virtualization you get. That's the only form of virtualization you need to know at this point in time in this course. So if you intend on writing the exam, that's all you need to know when it comes to virtualization. Now, I did actually briefly touch on virtualization earlier when I had to explain something else. I believe I wanted to demonstrate to you guys how Windows looks and icons and that kinds of stuff. So in case you don't remember, a virtual machine is exactly like a real computer, guys, except it does not have its own actual hardware. It does have its own operating system, though. So when you go and create a virtual machine, and I'll show you guys in a moment what this all looks like, but when you create a virtual machine, you can choose what operating system you want to install on that virtual machine. You can choose whether this needs to be Windows or Apple or anything else. And if it's Windows, you can choose any version or edition you want, keeping in mind the architecture of your host operating system as well and the limitations of your host operating system. If you don't know what I mean by host operating system, the host is the actual laptop or desktop or server on which you're doing this. So if you are doing this on your desktop computer at home, the actual physical computer in front of you would be the host. It also has an operating system, and once you log on to that machine, then you can go and use what we call a hypervisor. Hyper-V would just be one of many examples of that. You can go and use a program called a hypervisor, and this hypervisor is essentially what allows you to create what we call virtual machines. And on each and every one of these virtual machines, you can go and install its own, well, its own operating system. You've got to keep in mind, though, that these virtual machines don't have their own hardware, so they need to get that from somewhere. Where do you think they get that from? They get that from the host. So, with that in mind, guys, you need to make sure this host is a very beefed up host. It needs to have a lot of resources, a lot of RAM, a very fast CPU, a lot of free space on the hard drive because you are going to be sharing that with the virtual machines. All right, so virtualization is running multiple operating systems on a single computer. You'll be running one on the actual computer itself, which we call the host, and then you'll be running at least one on every virtual machine that you've got. How many you've got, that's up to you, and it's obviously limited by the amount of hardware you've got. The host computer, just to recap, is the actual machine on which this is all running, the actual machine that you can touch, the actual laptop or desktop or server. The hypervisor is the software we use to, well, create these virtual machines, run these virtual machines, and manage these virtual machines. You get many hypervisors out there, folks. One of the ones that comes built into Windows most of the time these days is something called Hyper-V. Microsoft was not exactly creative with the name. They literally took the word hypervisor and shortened it to Hyper-V, and well, that is their hypervisor. That's the one I'm going to be demonstrating to you guys. You do get other ones out there as well, though. I mean, you get Virtual PC, VirtualBox, Oracle, VMware, and much, much more. The majority of these ones I've just mentioned, you've got to go and download them and install them, and some of them do have licensing involved. Hyper-V, on the server side, you just add it as a role, if you guys know what a server operating system is and what a role is. You don't need to know that, though. On the client operating system, so this would be something like Windows 10 or 11, you need to go and add it as a feature, not something you need to worry about at this point in time in this course. I'm once again just mentioning as an extra to you guys. And then the guest operating system, guys, is the operating system you would install on the virtual machine. So if I have one virtual machine, I would have one guest operating system. That would be the operating system that you install on the virtual machine. If I've got 3 virtual machines running on a host, you would have one host operating system. That's the one running on the actual machine that you can touch. And you would have 3 guest operating systems. Any operating system installed on the virtual machines is referred to as a guest operating system. All right, folks, just very quickly to help reinforce all of what I just said, I'm going to quickly switch over to what is known as Hyper-V in the background. So that's Microsoft's version of a hypervisor, just to briefly show you what this all entails and what the heck I'm talking about. So switching over.
A few moments later.
Alright, folks, here we are on what is known as Hyper-V. And if you come in here for the first time, it'll probably look something like that. It's going to be blank, not that it matters. You click on your computer's name. It's a random generated name that I've got because I pretty much just installed this operating system. And then here you can go and create any amount of virtual machines you want, keeping in mind you are limited by the amount of resources you've got. So I can create 100 virtual machines, but I will not necessarily be able to run them all because, well, they all do need RAM and they all do need CPU power. And the question here is, do I have enough to run them all? Probably not. So I've got 2 here at the moment. One has got Windows 10 installed. One has got Server 2019 installed. And I can go run both of these operating systems at the same time. And that's actually what I did earlier when I did my demonstrations for you guys with regards to Windows 10. I started this virtual machine up earlier. And that virtual machine is running in the background. And it's got its own operating system in the background. So yeah, let me start this up for you guys, just so you guys can see what it looks like. So I'm going to start this sucker up. And since this is going to take a while, I'm going to speed this video up just for a moment. So let me just click on connect here. Give it a moment. You can open a new window. You can basically go and change this thing so it fills up the whole screen. Anyway, guys, so this is going to take a while to start up. So let me just speed up the video quickly.
One eternity later.
Alright, here we are on the logon screen. So you can see this is a whole computer on its own. So it's not full screen at the moment. I'm doing that on purpose. You can see it in the background. There's my stuff. And you can see it says it's running there. It's running at the moment. How much RAM I've assigned, which is 4 gigs. There it says Burning Ice. Or my channel's name is BurningIceTech. It doesn't have a pause at the moment. So I'm going to log on to this thing. And let's just speed up a couple of seconds again.
A few moments later.
And there we go, folks. We are on the desktop. So that is the virtual machine I was actually using earlier in this video for my demonstrations. It's just earlier I was zoomed in more, or this thing was full screen, so you guys can just see that to avoid confusion, because at that point in time I did not fully explain yet what a virtual machine is, and that would just cause confusion. But now you can see. So I chose to install Windows 10 on this virtual computer. It's an actual computer. It's got its own operating system, its own documents. I can go and install its own applications on it. I can do whatever the heck I want on this. I just need to keep in mind it does not have its own RAM. So if you could check in the background, it's taking 4 gig from my actual host computer, the actual host operating system. Now, coincidentally, on my host machine, I actually also have Windows 10 installed at the moment. So the host has got Windows 10 installed. This virtual machine's also got Windows 10 installed. That just happens to be a coincidence. Anyway, folks, so that's virtual machines for you guys. Let's move on to the next topic. Next up, we're going to circle back to the topic of Microsoft Windows, and we're going to somewhat do that with some of the other operating systems as well, because it's very important. So quickly, regarding Microsoft Windows, guys, this is estimated to run on about 90% of desktops and laptops. So in general, across the globe, up to 90% of desktops and laptops are running Microsoft Windows. Now, it's important to keep in mind we're not talking about a specific version or edition of Windows. We're not talking about Windows 10 or 11. We're talking about Windows in general as a whole. Now, granted, this figure is going to vary from country to country. In some countries, it might be 100%. In some countries, it might be 50%. But on average, it's about 90% across the globe. Scary thought, right? And earlier, I told you, out of those people running Windows, about 80% of them are still running Windows 10. Yep, the number is that high. And only a mere 10 or 15% are running Windows 11. And this has got to do with a bunch of variables that you guys don't know about. One of them has got to do with the requirements to be able to run Windows 11. So it's not that people don't want to run it. They want to. It's just they can't because they need certain requirements that needs to be met. And this is things like having a TPM chip on the motherboard. It's short for Trusted Platform Module. It's an actual chip on the motherboard that does encryption. Now, normally in the past, we would use this for encryption for things like BitLocker, but now we also need this to be able to run Windows 11. So it's a bit of a snag in the works. All right, folks, and then you also get client and server editions of the operating systems, and you also get different versions. So there's been many different versions released over the years. So regarding editions and versions, so on the client side, you get things like Windows 7, 8, 8.1, 10, and 11. On the server side, you'll get 2012 R2, you'll get 2016, 2019, 2022. So these are the different versions and stuff you get of server. Now, as for editions and stuff, when you get server, you get client editions, you get enterprise, you get professional edition, education editions for some of these things, especially if you look at this from a client's perspective, something we'll talk about in a little bit. But before we do that, I think let's just mention a couple of versions to you guys. So over the years, I did mention some of these to you guys just a moment ago, but over the years, we've had many versions of Windows. I'm going to start you guys off with Windows XP, and yes, I'm well aware that this is not the first one when it comes to Windows. There was many ones before XP that I have not mentioned in this list, but we're coming at it from a Windows XP perspective because that's what's included in the course. Anything before Windows XP is not included in this course, folks. You do not need to know that. If you do, consider that a bonus. So Windows XP, folks, this was released in 2001. Can you believe it has been that long? Then around the end of 2007, mid 2008 is when we got Windows Vista or Vista. Depending on the country you're in, you'll pronounce that differently. Then around 2009, I think it was in October 2009, Windows 7 was released. Then in 2012, we got Windows 8. Literally a year later, we got Windows 8.1. In 2015, we got Windows 10. So Windows 10 was released in 2015. And then Windows 11, folks, this was released in 2021 during COVID times. Whoa, we've come a long way, haven't we? Now, as for editions, like I said earlier, so versions is what I pretty much explained to you guys now. And you had, even on the server side, we had 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, 2022. Editions wise, that would be things like enterprise, professional, that kinds of stuff. So each Windows version is made available in different editions, guys. Not all editions are going to be discussed in this course. This is just to give you guys a ballpark idea of what the heck we're talking about. So coming at this from a Windows 10 perspective, keeping in mind that Windows 10 is not the latest operating system. Windows 10, for example, comes out on Home. So that's what the average Joe would use at home for office work and gaming and stuff. And that's more than enough for what you need at home. Then you've got Pro Edition, you've got Enterprise Edition, and Education or Pro Education Edition. Now, the Education Editions, folks, is not something I see often. The idea of these editions is they're supposed to be used by training institutions like schools and colleges and universities and so on. But if you go look at these schools and colleges and universities and so on, you'll find they normally are running things like Windows Pro, Enterprise, maybe Home, but they're not running education editions. I've seen them, but it's very rare you'll find that. Then we also find good old 32-bit versus 64-bit, something that was discussed already earlier in this video. So 32-bit, that's legacy. That's all technology. That's the architecture of your operating system, and that's the architecture of your CPU. So ideally, if you have a choice here, folks, you want to go 64-bit. That's the better one. That's the newer one. It's going to give you more performance. It's going to give you more benefits. It's just benefits, benefits, benefits. It's just better in all senses and ways. Now, moving on to a bit of a different operating system, something that was mentioned briefly earlier. Apple Mac operating system. All right, so there's a bit of a picture for you guys. It's not necessarily the latest operating system for Mac, but nonetheless, that's a bit of a picture for you guys as to what Mac looks like. So for those of you that's only been using Windows, you'll notice that this looks quite different, doesn't it? The icons looks different, the menu at the bottom looks different, very different than what the Windows guys might be, used to. As for you guys that's been using Mac, to this to you guys will probably seem like old stuff, Anyway, so Mac operating system can only be installed on Apple Mac hardware. Isn't that interesting, guys? It's not a very important thing right now, maybe to you guys, but in the exam, that's going to be important. They want to see if you guys know or if you can remember that Apple or the Apple operating system can only be installed on Apple Mac hardware. Go figure, right? Now, speaking of Apple, you also get Apple's iOS operating system, something we did mention earlier, and I mentioned to you guys the iOS operating system is something we would normally install on a mobile device, something like a phone or a tablet. So there's a picture for you guys, more or less what it looks like, keeping in mind that's obviously not what everybody's looks like. You do get different versions and editions for different phones. It depends on how up to date the phone is, how new the phone is, and. So this runs on iPhone and iPad hardware only. So there's Apple again, forcing the operating system only to work on their hardware. Version updates can drop support for older hardware models. So there's going to be a point in time when one day you're just using your phone and you're going to find that it's no longer supported by Apple. You're not going to get any updates anymore, no support from Apple anymore. And that's not just an Apple unique thing, guys. This applies to Microsoft, it applies to all the other vendors, and quite frankly, just products in general. Never mind operating systems for phones or whatever. There's going to be a point in time where support just stops. And this is a real snag in the work for most of us with all operating systems. You get yourself a new device and a new operating system. After a couple of months or a couple of years, suddenly you don't get updates anymore, and then very soon you don't have support anymore. And God forbid if something happens to your device, then, well, you're going to find yourself in a bit of a predicament. Other operating systems I just want to briefly touch on, because I did mention them earlier, but I didn't really explain anything about them, is UNIX, Linux, sometimes called Linux, and then Chrome's operating system. Right, so as for Unix, hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, depends on the country you're in. This, folks, is developed in parallel by various institutions. So there's multiple institutions at work here. It's not a single place or a single entity per se. As for the Linux or Linux one, so this guy is derived from Unix but is fully open source. Now, if you don't know what open source means, it means it is free. Free to the public. You can go and get yourself Linux or Linux completely for free. And open source means it's not just free, but you can actually go and tamper the code, and it's not illegal to go and do that. You can go and alter this or change this in any way you see fit, assuming developing and all that, and that's completely acceptable. It's not illegal. It's allowed. And guys, this operating system is actually more widely deployed as a server operating system than a desktop one. I'm not saying you won't find this on desktops or laptops. I know plenty of people that use this on their desktops or laptops. Some people exclusively only use that. And it's generally because this is seen as a more secure and more stable operating system. But you'll more commonly come across this operating system in the server world. Now, as for the last one, Chrome operating system. This derived from Linux, can you believe it, to run Chromebook and Chromebox hardware. It was originally designed to work with web applications rather than locally installed software. Who knew, right? And then, folks, we've got Android. So Android is Google's operating system, which is predominantly used for phones and tablets. Obviously not limited to that. I mean, you do get this on TVs and other platforms as well. So this is for smartphones, tablets, and it's derived from Linux. Who knew? I mean, up until not too long ago, even I did not know that, believe it or not. Often this is customized by vendors. So if you are using Android on your phone, and I'm using it on my phone, but we're using two different vendors. If I'm using a Samsung phone and you're using a Huawei phone, just because we both have Android installed, assuming you have Android installed even, it does not mean it looks the same or that it's got exactly the same functions and functionality and features and stuff. The vendors themselves will go and change this and alter this sometimes to be customized for their specific phone or platform. And even if we've got the same brand of phone, and I can have a Samsung and you can have a Samsung, you'll find it still might not look exactly the same. It might still vary. So yes, this is often customized by vendors. Some of the vendors is things like Acer, Asus, HTC, Huawei, LG, Motorola, OnePlus, Oppo, Samsung, Sony, Xiaomi, and I don't know what else. There's many, many other ones, and I probably pronounced some of these incorrectly as well. But there's a bit of a list for you guys. Now, there's going to be times when you're going to see major and minor version updates. Unfortunately, these updates are something we normally can't really avoid. If you do not get updates, you're going to find the phone just doesn't work, or very soon after that, it'll stop working. And if you do get updates, then often you'll find the phone also doesn't work, specifically because of some silly update that took place. And there's not really much we can do. You might say, hey, let me go and reset the phone, factory reset it, and remove all the updates. Yeah, it might work. It might. If you're lucky enough to get it to work, it'll work for a very short period of time until it goes and downloads a lot of updates again. Then you're going to be stuck in the same predicament, basically. Right, folks, next topic in this module is File Explorer, also known as Windows Explorer. Some folks just call this Explorer. Now, this is actually something that was covered earlier in the video, so guys, feel free to go check that out earlier in the video. Earlier in the video, when I did my demo, when I was browsing around on Windows, showing you guys Windows around, there I did not just explain it, but I actually even showed it to you guys. So in case you don't remember, there's a bit of a screenshot for you guys. So Explorer is what allows you to browse around on the machine. It's what allows you to go into your videos, your pictures, your documents. It's what allows you to go and browse around the machine and integrate with your files and find your files and that kinds of stuff. So I'm going to go on ahead and go on to the next topic, which is Control Panel. Now, Control Panel is something that we currently do still find on Windows. Even the latest version of Windows, which is version 11, it's still there. But over the years, it has gotten a bit of a makeover here and there. They might have changed an icon, the look or the feel for some icons. But for the most part, still the same thing. You, for the most part, still have the same functions. However, you would have noticed if you're running Windows 10 that Microsoft has ever so slightly started removing certain functions and features and goodies from Control Panel. Things that used to be there, which is just no longer there. So every time Microsoft decides to go and do those big fat updates, not the normal one, those big ones which they call feature updates, whenever Microsoft does those, which is like once every 6 months or 12 months, they sometimes add stuff to the operating system or remove stuff to the operating system. Sometimes so much so that it's a whole new operating system altogether. And when they do that, you would have noticed they sometimes remove things from Control Panel. Now, it's not because it's removed from your operating system as a whole. No, it's just been removed from Control Panel and it's been moved into what is known as the Settings app. Which brings me to my next topic here. Now, the Windows Settings app is technically the new Control Panel. There's a bit of a screenshot for you guys as to what it looks like. So that's what it looks like on Windows 10. You also find this on Windows 11. So on Windows 11, it looks different than what we see in the picture here, but it's still there. So on Windows 10 and on Windows 11, you just go click on Settings. It looks like a little gear icon, like a little sprocket. It'll open what is known as the Windows Settings app. It will just say Windows Settings, like in a screenshot. And that is technically the new control panel. So at the moment, as I'm making this video, both the old control panel and the new one still exist on both Windows 10 and 11. But I'm saying it like that because Microsoft will remove the old control panel. When exactly, we don't know. Only Microsoft will know. But they have gradually started removing some of the functions and the features and the goodies that you would find normally on control panel. They've moved them to the new one. They can only be found on the new one. Now, this is probably a sneaky ninja trick way of getting us to use the new control panel to get comfortable and familiar with the new control panel so that when they remove the old one, you don't go into a panic and be like, oh, I don't know where this is. I don't know where that is, because you've actually already been using the new one for quite some time. At least that's the idea, folks. So if you don't know what the control panel is and the settings app is, this is where you'll find the majority of your computer's system settings. You can go check system overview. You can go check your networking settings or go and configure networking settings. You can go and customize the computer's look and feel. Change pretty much anything about your machine. I mean, the word settings should tell you everything you need to know. It's to change settings about your device or your machine. So if you go in there, you can change pretty much anything, unless you're going into the control panel because they've removed some of the settings. Right, folks, let's move on to the next topic, which is the last topic for this unit, using a web browser. Now, if you don't know what a web browser is, this is software that you would install on your device. This is not limited to a laptop or a desktop, folks. This could also be a tablet or a phone or lots of other devices. You even get these on TVs, for crying out loud. A browser is what we use to browse the internet, to view web pages. This could be the CompTIA's web page. This could be YouTube. The browser that you're using now to view YouTube, well, that's an example. This could be something like, if I have to choose a browser, this could be Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, which we call IE for short. I'm hoping you guys don't use one of those two, because those two don't, I don't know, they suck. This could be Mozilla Firefox. It could be Google's Chrome browser. It could be Apple Safari browser. And you get many, many other ones as well, which are less known, but they're not necessarily bad browsers. Either way, it is what we use to view a web page like youtube.com, where you're viewing this video right now. If you look at the picture on the right, most browsers nowadays, if not all, will have tabs at the top, so you can actually be on multiple pages at the same time. You will have a URL bar. And now that's, if you go look at number one, on the screenshot, where it says https certification.comptia.org, that is a URL. That is where you put the URL. So the URL is short for Uniform Resource Locator. You don't need to know that, but in short, it is the address of the website. And you'll find the majority of these browsers will allow you to go and bookmark a page. Sometimes it's literally just called bookmarks. Other times it'll be called favorites, depending on the browser you're using. And they've got lots of cool functions, but it all depends on the actual browser you're using. Alright, folks, so that is it for Unit 3. Moving on to Unit 4, managing an operating system. Right, folks, so with regards to managing an operating system, first thing up is management interfaces. So this could be something we have actually covered earlier, control panel or Windows settings. So that would be called the settings app, which is basically the new control panel. I think we've covered that like 3 times already in this video. But the fact that CompTIA is covering it multiple times should tell you something, that it might be in the exam. So control panel, you've seen the picture. Windows settings, you've seen the picture. Both of these have been covered multiple times in the video. If you want to see that, just scroll back to that part of the video. Now, something else we can also go and use is something called a management console. There's actually multiple ones we can go and make use of. And these, sometimes they do something as a whole. They've got a bunch of functions and features. Other times they do something specific. Now, one of the first management consoles I'm going to mention to you guys is something called computer management. Now, this is the default console. There's a bit of a picture for you guys. If you look at the left-hand side of that picture in the navigation menu, you will notice there's actually multiple tools for you to go and choose from. Now, that multiple tools can actually be accessed via multiple ways. Computer management is just one of multiple ways you or the user can go and use to access some of those tools. And the tools we see in that list, guys, that's not all of them. There's many, many other computer management tools which are not even in that list. Even computer management itself, how do we access that? Guys, there's multiple ways. You can go do it via control panel. You can go and do it via running a command. Multiple ways to get to your goal. The other management consoles you guys can go and make use of, and this is one of my personal favorites, is custom consoles with selected snap-ins. Now, this custom console they're referring to is actually something called MMC for short, which stands for Microsoft Management Console. So if you go to your run command on your computer, if you know what the run command is, and you go run a search for mmc.msc, so it's mmc.msc. If you type that into the run command, you're going to see it's going to open up the MMC management console. And in the beginning, it's going to be blank. I'll show you guys that just in a moment, what it actually looks like. And it's up to you to go and add various snap-ins. The snap-in you add will obviously allow you to go and do certain things on the machine. So on that note, let me show you guys what this looks like on that virtual machine I showed you guys earlier. But before I switch over, I'm going to make that virtual machine, well, full screen for the most part. You guys can see a little bit better what the heck is actually going on. I'm not going to zoom out like I did earlier of Hyper-V when we were covering virtualization. Anyway, so switching over to the virtual machine for MMC.
A few moments later.
Alright folks, like usual, we're back on that virtual machine again for the how many of time now, I don't even know anymore. So what we can do is we can go here to the bottom, we can try and type it in, but I've seen quite often it will not actually pop up necessarily if you just type it in as is. We might get lucky, maybe it will. So I'm going to type in MMC, let's just see if we get lucky today. No, it's not popping up. Let's say if I type it into search, oh there we go. I didn't even type in .msc and I didn't even type it into the run command. I literally just typed it into Cortana, the search engine here at the bottom, and it starts picking it up already. So there it is, MMC, Microsoft Management Console. I'm going to click that and open it up. Asks me if I'm sure I want to. This is user account control. I'm going to say yes. And there we go, folks. So in the beginning, this is what it looks like. It is blank. So you can see it says console 1. It's blank. We haven't done anything yet. We have not added anything yet. So we now need to go and add what is known as a snap-in to tell this thing what it needs to, well, allow us to go and do. The snap-ins we add are for the most part administrative tools. And yes, you can go and add them as snap-ins, but once again, this is not the only way you can go and access those administrative tools. So the way you add a snap-in is to go to the top left where it says File and Remove Snap-in. You click on that, and it gives you a fairly decent list of a lot of admin consoles or administrative tools and so on. And even though that's a lot, that is still not all of them, guys. So I can now go and add, let's say, disk management as an example to allow me to manage my hard drives and things like that. Event viewer to see what has happened on my machine. So this is basically logs. I'm literally just adding random things here, folks. So let me just go and add a couple. I'm gonna go click on that. It's a bit slow. So I'm just gonna go and add a couple. There we go. Let's see if we've got resource monitor in here. They've got performance monitor. I don't even see resource monitor. I mean, for example, you get another one called resource monitor. I don't even see that listed here. Anyway, so let's go click on OK so you guys can see what this looks like. Now it looks very similar to computer management, which we saw in a screenshot earlier. On the left, we once again have a navigation menu with all the snap-ins I've added. So I've added 2 of them. But you can go and add a whole bunch. It's up to you. And if you click on that component, it'll open that tool as if you opened the tool. And you'll have full functionality on a tool like you would normally do. All right, let's quickly go back to our list. All right, so we've covered MMC. Next up is registry editor. If you want to open this bad boy, you're going to have to go and type in what I've typed there in pink, reg edit. And if you don't type that in, it's not going to open it up. Guys, do not go in there unless you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have experience, rather ask someone else to do this for you. And then eventually when you gain more experience, and obviously this applies to all of us, then you can go and fiddle in there. So all of us in the beginning start out by not knowing a lot, and then as time goes by, you gain more experience, and then eventually you'll know what you're doing. So there, everything you install, and for the most part, most of the stuff you do on a computer, they go and make what we call registry edits, or registry entries. So I'm going to show you guys quickly on that virtual machine what this looks like once we open it. So let's quickly switch back. Here we are again. I'm going to go to the search bar, and I type in reg edit. You can see there we go. Reg edit. I'm going to click on that. Once again, yes, I'm sure I want to open this. And there we go. So that's what the registry editor looks like, folks. Anyway, let's go back to that list again. Alright, and then the last thing I'm going to mention here to you folks regarding management interfaces is command prompt and PowerShell. Now these are 2 different topics, but they're both command based. So I'm going to first show you guys command prompt, and then I'm going to show you PowerShell. So before we switch over to the next topic, let's quickly go back to that virtual machine. Like usual, folks, here we are. I'm going to go here to the bottom. I'm going to type in CMD, which is for command prompt. There we go. So that's a command line interface. This has actually been around on Windows since pretty much the beginning of time. And you can go and type in various command prompt commands here. It actually does accept a few programming languages as well. I happen to know that it accepts HTML and C++ and a whole bunch of other ones as well. I'm not a developer, but I do know that it does accept a couple of programming languages as well. Now you can actually go and convert command prompt to PowerShell by typing a 1-line command, but we're not going to do that right now. So you can either go and type it in there if you want to access PowerShell, or I'm going to close this, and you can go and type in PowerShell to access PowerShell. Normally it's blue, but that's not set in stone. There we go. Windows PowerShell. Going to open that sucker up. And there we go. So normally it's blue, but you could actually access this or open this via command prompt, It's going to be a black window then, but you'll see in the beginning it's going to say PowerShell. So you're actually typing in PowerShell commands then. So there are a lot of similarities between PowerShell and command prompt, but they're not exactly the same. So in PowerShell, yes, you can go and type in command prompt commands, but for the most part, we are going to be typing in what is known as PowerShell commands into PowerShell. Now, a lot of IT guys make use of this, even though they might not necessarily know any PowerShell commands or scripts. Now, how we do that is we go to our trusty friend Google. When you know how it is in IT. If anyone in IT ever tells you they don't use Google or YouTube, they're lying to you. Let me tell you that much. So if you don't know what you're doing, you go to Google or YouTube, any search engine, or you ask a friend or a colleague. It's going to take you to a forum online, most likely, like TechNet, GitHub, Microsoft Learn, and there you will find the script you're looking for. Often it'll be exactly what you're looking for. It'll come with instructions most of the time that tells you how to go and use it, what to go and change, with what to go and change that something, why you're changing that something, how to go and use this command, everything you need to know. So basically this comes down to why reinvent the wheel when the wheel has already been invented. Anyway, folks, let's go back to that presentation. Alrighty, folks, next up we've got Task Manager. Now, the chances are that the majority of you guys have at the very least heard of this tool. Maybe not used it, but at the very least you would have heard of this tool. Now, most of you guys probably have actually used it as well. You don't have to be a technician to use this tool. This is one of the very few tools that the majority of people have used, even though they might not necessarily be in IT. Now, the way you open this would be to go and press the Control key, the Alt key, and the Delete key at the same time. So it's Control, Alt, and Delete. By holding down all three keys, that'll allow you to go open Task Manager. Another way, believe it or not, you can also go and open this. This is actually a way that a lot of people are not aware of, is to go and press Control, Shift, and Escape. So once again, three keys. So instead of Control, Alt, and Delete, it's Escape, Shift, and the Control key. By combining those three keys at the same time, you'll also be able to open Task Manager. Alternatively, what you can do, but it depends on your operating system, you can go and right click on the taskbar at the bottom, and you'll find one of the options there says Task Manager. Now, if you guys don't know what Task Manager is used for, it's actually used for multiple things. It consists of about 6-7 tabs, if not more. You can use Task Manager to monitor and control processes as well as other performance indicators. So you can go into the Processes tab, and if there's anything that's consuming an enormous amount of resources, if it's just timing out or it's faulty, you can go and do what is known as killing that process that is not responding. Or if something is just not behaving the way you intend, maybe it's not a matter of it's not responding, it's just a matter of this thing as being a pesky little creature, you can also go and kill it there. You've got the Performance tab, so if you look at the screenshot, there's a Performance tab as well, so if you go there, you'll be able to see the four main counters: CPU, memory, hard drive, and network respectively. And you can actually go and see them in a lot more detail if you go use another tool called the Resource Monitor. App history speaks for itself, shows you which apps you've used recently. Startup tab shows you what back-end processes starts up with the PC in the background. Now, as time goes by, you'll find your PC is going to get slower and slower and slower. It's not necessarily because the hard drive is full, although that might be one reason. It's not necessarily because you've got malware, something like a virus, although that's also another possible reason. It's often just because you've installed a lot of stuff, and these stuff are starting up with Windows in the background. So it's causing it to be quite slow. The Users tab will show you all the users that's currently logged on. So for the most part, that tab's pretty useless unless you are doing this on a server and there's multiple people logged into the same server at the same time. Then it can actually prove quite useful. The Details tab, very much the same as the Processes tab. And the Services tab, way on the right, is actually probably the most useless one in this case. Not that we don't need to access the services. We absolutely need to do that, and we absolutely need to go and control them. But that one there gives you very limited functionality. So if you ever need to go and access the services, if you know what that is, my recommendation would be to just go into the actual services console itself, not to use that tab, since the tab is quite limited. Now, speaking of services, that brings us to service management. So if you were to actually go and run the console or open the console for services, the main one, you'll find you've got way more functionality and features and all that. You can go and configure way more stuff, kill way more stuff, configure things, whether they should start up with Windows or should they start up manually. Do you want to disable them? You can go and choose a lot of settings. So services, in case you have no idea what that is, Services are the processes that run in the background on Windows. So if you go and look at the taskbar at the bottom, you might very well see absolutely nothing there at the moment, but it does not mean there's nothing running in the background. An example of a very well-known service would be something called the print spooler. It's always running in the background. It always starts up automatically, whether you've got a printer or not. Yes, it's got to do with printers. It's kind of in the name. Now, the purpose of the print spooler is it kind of acts like the queue for your printer. So when you or someone prints one day, whenever that might be, the document in question will go into this magical queue, which we call the print spooler. And then after that, it's going to go to the printer and it's going to get printed. So that print spooler needs to always be there. It needs to always run. Otherwise, well, people are not going to be able to print. And then what we can also say about service management is it supports functionality of operating system and many applications, folks. And like I said earlier, in the services console, you can go and start, stop, and configure services. You can go and choose when they start, manually, automatically, are they enabled, are they disabled, and much, much more. Now, moving on to another tool, which is called the Task Scheduler. This is one of my personal favorites. Even though I don't actually always get the time to use it, it still remains one of my all-time favorites. Now, the majority of the tools I've mentioned so far, including this one, are available on both the client side as well as the server side. So if I say client side, I mean you can find this on like Windows 7, 8, 10, and 11. And if I say server side, I mean you can find this on all the server operating systems like Server 2012 R2, Server 2016, Server 2019, and so on and so forth. Now, if you don't know what it's used for, the name kind of tells you what you need to know. It's used to schedule tasks. You can go and automate just about anything you can think of, guys. So the description is you can go and automate execution of processes, but it's not just limited to that. And you can also go and choose between multiple triggers, such as schedule. So if I go into Task Scheduler, in case you guys don't know how to open it, you can literally just go to your search bar on your computer, type in Task Scheduler, and on the top right hand side, if you look at the screenshot, you'll see there's a button that says Create Task. There you'll be able to give it a name, and you can go and choose between various triggers. Triggers would be something like a schedule. So this event would open or get triggered on a certain date or a certain time. You can actually be as precise as to the second. So I can go specify years in advance, months in advance, weeks and days, hours and minutes, and even seconds in advance as to exactly when something would happen. Does something need to be displayed? Should it launch a script? Should it launch a program or a game? Those are examples of schedules. You can choose if this is a once-off occurrence or if this needs to happen daily, weekly, or monthly. If it's daily, is it every day or just certain days? If it's weekly, is it every week or just certain weeks? And so on and so forth. You've got full-on flexibility, folks. Now, schedule is just one of the triggers. I mean, you can also go and choose other triggers, for example, like when the PC starts up, when a person logs on, logs off, or when the PC is idling, when something gets changed, and much, much more. So, yeah, you can go and use your imagination as to what you want to go and schedule on the machine. All right, let's move on to something called memory and disk management. Now, folks, in case you don't know, you get many kinds of memory in a computer, but in this instance, when we talk about memory, we're for the most part talking about system memory, which is more commonly known as RAM in a laptop or a desktop or so. So that's system memory. It's called RAM. It is volatile memory. Now, if you don't know what volatile means, it means that if power is lost on this machine, anything in the RAM, being your system memory, would also be lost. Now, for that to make sense, let's give you guys an example. If you are in front of your laptop or desktop right now, anything that you've got open on your laptop or desktop, that is in your RAM. So when you open a browser or you open a program or a game or a document, it loads that from your hard drive into your RAM. Your RAM is temporary memory, but it's very flippin' fast memory. So anything you see open on your computer at the moment, that is currently in your RAM. But now, if your laptop or desktop happens to restart or it loses power, let's say the battery runs out on your laptop, or you just yank out a power cable on the laptop or the desktop and the machine turns off, would you agree with me that everything you had open would be lost? Now, when I say lost, I mean it's just closed. I don't mean it's lost. So if you were to go and dig on your machine, let's say it was a browser, you'd be able to open the browser again and browse back to that page. If it was a document or a file was open, you can just browse to it again and open it again. If it was a program or a game that was open, you can just go and relaunch it again. So as soon as you open that file or document again or relaunch it again, it's going to load it from the hard drive back into the RAM. So once again, RAM is volatile because whatever is in the RAM is lost if power is lost. If you look at something like a hard drive, which is quite slower than RAM chips, it's way slower. That is an example of non-volatile because when the power is lost, whatever's on a hard drive is not lost. You can always go and reopen those files. Anyway, so system memory is provided by RAM modules. Some people call these RAM chips. It's got lots of names. And then when we move on to mass storage, which is something I did touch on just a moment ago, that would be something like a hard drive, folks. And this is non-volatile memory. Because whatever is on that hard drive, if you go and yank out the power cord, yes, it's going to be closed, but it does not stop you from double clicking on it again and opening it again. So yeah, anyway, hard drives, these are generally fixed hard drives. In the old days, you only got one kind, so we just called all hard drives a hard drive. Nowadays, for the last 10 years or so, you get two kinds of hard drives. Well, actually three, but we only talk about two of them. The one is something we just call HDD, which is a normal hard disk drive. That's a mechanical hard disk drive. That's the old school technology. And it's got a spindle with movable parts and all that. There's benefits to it. There's drawbacks to it. Then you've got what we call an SSD, solid state drive. That's the newer technology. It's a heck of a lot faster than a normal mechanical drive. It's got a couple of benefits and a couple of drawbacks as well. So one of the obvious benefits is obviously speed, because it's a heck of a lot faster. But there are a couple of drawbacks to that as well. Unfortunately, that's not covered in this course. Quite frankly, folks, that's actually not even covered in the A+ course. If you're curious what those benefits and drawbacks are, feel free to drop a comment down below and ask, and then I'll just elaborate on what that might be. Speaking of which, people, if you are still watching this video up to this point in time, well done, because it's probably over the 2-hour mark by now. Clearly, you guys are very dedicated. And there's normally a game I would like to play with the people at this point in time. It's basically in the comment section. So if you are still watching the video at this point in time, drop the word in the comment section, Cookie Monster. Now, the idea of this is anyone that's reading through the comment section will have no idea why everybody's commenting Cookie Monster. Cookie Monster is going to confuse the daylights out of them. Now, obviously, if you have a legitimate comment you want to go and drop or a legitimate question, that's fine. You can still drop it down below and I will answer your questions. But just for fun and gags, you can go and drop the phrase Cookie Monster, or you can go make a new sentence with the word Cookie Monster. You can be creative about it. Just stick to YouTube's rules. Don't swear and do anything like that. And then we can have a couple of laughs about it. So anyone that's actually watched the video up to this point, only they would know what it's all about. And on that note, folks, if you haven't done it already, please give this video a like. It does help me. It does help the channel. The more you like the video, the more it's going to pop up in front of people's faces, which means we get to help more people out there that does not have money for free training material or that. So you're not just helping me, you're helping lots of people out there. Anyway, let's move on. So we've talked about system memory. We've talked about mass storage. Now, what the cheese is virtual memory? Virtual memory, folks, this is sometimes also known as page file memory. I don't think they call it that in this course, or they don't even mention it in this course. But virtual memory is also referred to as page file memory. Now that, folks, is when you use a very small portion of your hard drive, although you can change this value. You use a very small portion of your hard drive as if it is RAM. Now the RAM, as I've said earlier, is way faster than the hard drive. So anything you have open on your machine would normally be loaded into RAM because that's a heck of a lot quicker than the hard drive. If it has to go zigzag between the hard drive and the CPU, nothing would get done. It's going to feel like your computer is just freezing all the time. So instead, anything you open would be temporarily loaded into RAM, and then between the RAM and the CPU is going to go zigzag, zigzag, zigzag as it gets calculated and processed, which gives you a smooth feeling and just feels like things are actually getting done. Now, there are times when your RAM runs out, believe it or not. So let's say maybe you've got 8 gigs worth of RAM. Now, maybe one day you've got so much nonsense open to the point where you've actually filled up all 8 gigs. Not something that happens often. This is very rare. But if and when that happens, normally the machine would crash. You would experience what is known as a blue screen of death. For a fraction of a second, you're going to see a blue error flashing on a screen. You're not going to have time to read it. You're not going to have time to take a photo or a screenshot or anything like that. You're going to have to go and check it afterwards in the logs, which is quite an annoying process. So now you've got no idea what just happened. Meanwhile, it's because you ran out of memory. Now, to avoid this from happening, you can actually go and dedicate a portion of your hard drive as if it is RAM. Now, obviously, it's not nearly as good or as fast as RAM, but it's the next best thing if you actually run out of RAM. I mean, it's going to be slower, but at least the overflow will spill over to the hard drive and it's not going to crash on you until that space obviously runs out again. Right, folks, next up we've got something called disk management. Now, this is a tool that's built into both the client and the server operating systems. It's Windows' tool that we use for hard drives, or well, should I say disks. It's not just for hard drives. You can actually go and use this for external drives, flash drives, any form of storage really. There are other ones out there that you can go make use of, which are non-Microsoft ones. You'll have to go and download them and install them. But for the most part, disk management is what the average Joe would go and use. It's what the average technician would go and use. It allows you to go and create what is known as partitions and file systems on fixed disks to make them usable by the operating system. You can also go and format removable or external drives. Any kind of drive can be formatted here. So to format it is to get that drive ready to be used. When you put a blank hard drive into a computer, you can imagine it's basically like an empty parking lot at a brand new supermarket. I mean, theoretically, cars can go and park in it, but it's going to be anarchy. So to avoid anarchy and chaos, what we can go and do is someone, maybe me or maybe you, can go to that parking lot and paint a couple of parking lines so that the cars will know where to go and park themselves. Now, why am I talking about a parking lot? Because, folks, hard drives work very similar to that. When you format a hard drive of a file system, you can imagine that someone is, digitally speaking, painting some parking lines on that hard drive or in that hard drive. And the data now, which is technically the cars in this example, would know where to go and park themselves. So it's to create order, it's to create structure, and disk management allows you to achieve that. It also allows you to go and subdivide hard drives, digitally speaking. This is called partitioning. So if you look at that picture on the right, if you have a hard drive, maybe it's disk 1. So if you look at disk 1, it's one hard drive. In this case, it looks like it's a flash drive. But you can go and subdivide that into two virtual hard drives, or partitions, should I say. And if you go to your computer and you go and open, your computer via Explorer, it's going to look like you've got two hard drives, but in reality, you actually just have one. It's just partitioned or subdivided, so you can go and organize stuff. Right, folks, and then moving on to the next topic, command line interfaces. I'm just going to skim across this one because we did actually cover this earlier, and I did actually even show it to you on that virtual machine I've been using so much. So this is used to type commands to operate the operating system instead of a GUI interface. So the GUI interface is what most of us like to go and use. Even most technicians like to go and use it because it's quick, it's easy, it's user friendly. But there are times when we don't have access to that. Yes, there are times like that, or where you might not be able to go and use it for some apparent reason. Now, in those situations, you can go make use of something called command prompt or PowerShell, both of which I showed you folks earlier. So the commands you have available depends on the environment. So in command prompt, you'll have to go and type command prompt commands for the most part, but it's not limited to that. Like I said earlier, you can go and type PowerShell commands into command prompt. If you convert command prompt to PowerShell, like I said earlier, it does also accept a couple of programming languages like C++ and HTML. And if you go to PowerShell, it does actually work with command prompt commands as well, never mind PowerShell commands. Alright, folks, and then we've got something called access control and protection. So access control systems ensure authorized use of computers, networks, and data resources. Now that's quite vague. I mean, I think you guys have got a fair understanding of what that entails, but it's quite vague. It can be a lot of things. I mean, this could literally be a security guard at the door. It could be a boom gate. It could be an actual door that's got maybe a keypad, or you've got to go and swipe a card or go enter a pin. All of these are examples of access control. So that the examples I just gave you will physically limit someone from entering a certain space. But digitally speaking, you can also get different kinds of access control. So if someone wants to access a certain resource, he or she or it might be prompted to provide certain credentials, to authenticate themselves, to prove they are who they claim to be, and to prove what level of access and privilege they've got. This could be most commonly done by something like a username and a password, email address and a password. Maybe someone has to provide some sort of biometrics. They might have to provide some sort of card, and the list goes on. Now, users are identified via accounts. And obviously, the accounts itself is not just limited to a username and a password. This entails everything I've just mentioned. Users access an account by authenticating with credentials which is known by them or held by them. So these credentials we're talking about would be something like username and a password once again, or it could be something that the person's got physically on them, like a smart card, a bank card, some sort of access card, or it could be something that they are as a human being, which is not even mentioned here. So that would be a form of biometric authentication. Fingerprint, retinal eye scan, voice recognition, facial recognition, that kind of stuff. And accounts, folks, are assigned privileges and rights to do things. So that refers to what we said earlier in this module. You never give someone or something more access or privilege or permissions than what they need to achieve a task or a goal. It's not just because we don't trust them, it's also in the event of that person's account getting compromised. So now we'll at least be able to limit what the hacker can see and what the hacker can go and do. And there's also the situation where if someone just goes off the rails, maybe someone goes rogue, they're upset. We call these disgruntled employees. And not if, but when that happens, we can limit the amount of damage that disgruntled employee can do and what they can actually see. Right, folks, and then on the actual machines themselves, your normal standard Windows machine, Windows 10 and 11, there's different kinds of account types you get. Now, I'm mentioning this to you guys because it's part of the course, but in reality, we don't really use these anymore, folks. We don't. So you get your administrator account, which is the main one we use, and quite frankly, these days, the only one we use. You get an account called a standard user account, and then you get an account called a guest user account. Now, if someone is a standard user, which used to be the average employee, he or she would, for example, not be allowed to install stuff, uninstall stuff, do certain changes on the machine. Whenever they try and do any of the things I just mentioned, it's going to pop up with a prompt. It's going to ask them for administrator credentials, and that's when they need to call an administrator, which would normally be you or someone in IT. Now, the reason why we don't use those accounts anymore is because now cloud is a thing these days. People are constantly using domains these days. That's not new. I mean, this is actually something that's been around for quite a long time. And the average person these days, guys, they all at some point in time need to install stuff, uninstall stuff, and configure stuff. Now, imagine for a moment you've got 1,000 or 10,000 users. Every day, during the whole day, a lot of these people are going to want to or need to install stuff and uninstall stuff. Do you really want to be that guy that's going to be walking up and down the whole day to go and type in your password? And it's not as simple as, hey, let me just go and type in my password. You first need to go and check, what is it that this person is trying to do? What are they trying to install or uninstall? Because maybe they're up to some sort of shenanigans. So you need to go and double check it first. And this all takes time. So you are effectively going to be wasting your whole day on a bunch of nonsense. So instead, we are going to go and do something else, which is what we do these days. And a guest account, guys, is what you would go and use if someone needs to have temporary access to something on your server or your computer. And if I need to give you access, for example, to a certain file or document on my computer, but I don't want to give you a full-blown admin account, I could go and temporarily turn on the guest account because it's actually turned off by default. I can temporarily put a password even on it if need be. I can give you the credentials for that account. You can temporarily log into my machine with limited credentials or limited privilege, and you're going to do this probably remotely via the network. And you can only see what I've allowed you to see, and you can only do what I've allowed you to do. All right, folks, moving on to the next topic. This is actually the last topic for this unit. I had to switch my mic there for just a second. Creating and managing user accounts. All right, so with regards to this, guys, you get different kinds of accounts that you can go and use to log on to your machine. The first one I want to mention to you guys is an account called a local account. This is the account that your machine comes with when you just installed the operating system. So if you have just installed Windows 10 or you have just installed Windows 11, it comes with one account that you can go and use, at least by default, and that, guys, is called the local account. That's the type of account it is. The actual name to the account could be anything. It's probably going to be your name because in the beginning, it's going to ask you to type in some sort of name, and it's probably going to be your own name you're going to go and type in. But that account is a local account. It checks locally on that device if you are the owner to that account or that device. And this is normally done by comparing a password to the username. So if it's got a password and you know the password, that would be authentication. And there are other local accounts which are more built-in accounts than anything else, but they're disabled for the most part. Now, the second kind of account I want to mention to you folks is a Microsoft account. These are also sometimes known as live accounts, and they're also sometimes known as online accounts. So Microsoft keeps changing their mind about what they want to call this. They can't seem to make up their mind. But at the moment, for the time being, it seems like they're calling this a Microsoft account. Now, for that, you can go to live.com, www.live.com. There you can go and create yourself a new email account. This will be seen as a Microsoft account or live account or online account, whatever you want to call it. And it's going to enter the extension or domain handler, which is an outlook.com. So it's going to be at outlook.com or at live.com, something in that sense. Now you can actually go and create yourself a 365 account as well. So if you have a 365 subscription, or if your company has a 365 subscription, believe it or not, those accounts are actually considered to be Microsoft accounts as well. But in your personal capacity, if you need to go and make one, you're probably going to end up going to live.com. And instead of authenticating locally on that device to check if you are the owner to this account or device, it's going to check online. So it's the same concept of authentication. It's just going to go and check, well, somewhere else if you are who you claim to be. Now, to be able to check the different kinds of accounts you've got on your machine, you can go and use something called local users and groups. This is a snap-in most of the time. It's not the only way you can go and access this, but most of us, including myself, I like to go and add this as a snap-in. Now, the word snap-in should sound familiar to you guys because earlier in this video, we showed you guys something called MMC, Microsoft Management Console. And when we had that topic, I showed you guys you can go and add various snap-ins. One of these many snap-ins that you have available there, folks, is the users and groups snap-in. If you go there and you add that snap-in, you're going to see it's going to show you all the local user accounts on your machine and all the local groups. And there's probably going to be only like 3 local accounts. It's going to be the main one that you're using, the one that it got when you just installed Windows or when you bought the machine. It's going to have the administrator account. It's going to actually be called administrator, and you'll notice it's disabled. It's going to have one called guest, which is also disabled. And if you would like to use guest or administrator at any point in time, you can just go and turn them on, give them a password if they don't have one, and voila, it is that simple. So yeah, if you want to use the snap-in, folks, just follow the steps I showed you earlier with regards to MMC, add a snap-in, and then you just go look for the one that says users and groups. All right, folks, moving on to the last unit in this module, Unit 5, Troubleshooting and Support. Now, folks, in this unit, there's pretty much just one main topic I'm going to be discussing with you guys, but it actually entails a lot. And that main topic is the troubleshooting model, also known as the troubleshooting methodology. Now, depending on what course you're doing, they might show you 4 steps, they might show you 6 steps. In this case, I'm going to show you guys 8 steps, but I think the actual way is about 6 steps at the moment. So if you have a problem that you're facing, and let's imagine for a moment this is someone's computer that's being a problem. The user complains the machine, for example, does not want to start. Something pretty common. I mean, this is going to happen all the time. So I'm farm sucking this now, literally, guys. I'm literally farm sucking this, making up a scenario as I'm going along. And that's just to kind of make this thing make more sense to you guys. So if you've got a user now complaining that their machine does not want to start, what is the first thing you need to do? The first thing you need to do is to identify the problem. And this is besides the user telling us what's wrong. So the user says, machine doesn't want to start. We don't know what the problem is yet. This could be anything. It could literally just be as simple as the machine is not plugged in. Maybe it's turned off by the wall socket, or it's turned off behind the PC by the little power button at the power supply. It can be any amount of things. Maybe there's something physically wrong with the machine. Maybe the voltage is too high or too low. The list I can give you of what can cause that is longer than a Christmas list. We would never finish if I had to go through that list. So now how do we identify what the problem could be? Well, guys, there's many ways you can go about it. My personal favorite is to ask questions. By asking questions, assuming you're actually able to do this, you can very quickly actually come to the conclusion of what the problem might be. So if you ask them questions like, sir, ma'am, when did you first start experiencing these problems? And they might say something along the lines of, well, Sonny, it was working fine yesterday afternoon when I was still working. And then ever since yesterday afternoon, it doesn't work anymore. So it basically from this morning doesn't work. So now we know we've got a time frame. something happened to this machine somewhere between yesterday afternoon and this morning. So they might say something along the lines of, ever since we had that lightning storm last night, the machine doesn't want to work. Okay, you don't say. So now, as an IT person, because of your experience and all that kinds of stuff, you might come to the conclusion, you know what? I think that lightning storm might have had something to do with it. Maybe, just maybe, there was a power surge. And maybe it blew something in this computer. Maybe the power supply, maybe the motherboard. 9 out of 10 times in real life, the power supply would kick the bucket. But if that's not the case, it might be the motherboard. If that's not the case, it might be the power supply and the motherboard. And if that's not the case, it'll be something entirely different. But I can tell you now, 90 to 95% chance it will be the power supply. So yeah, there you go. Identify the problem is the first step. The second step is actually to establish a theory. Well, that's the A plus way, which is actually a little bit more advanced in this course. But in ITF plus, they say the second step is to research knowledge base and the internet. So that kind of technically forms part of identifying the problem, guys, in my opinion. So identify the problem is the true blue first step here. And the real second step would be to establish a theory. Now, researching, the knowledge base, if you have access to any form of knowledge bases, to go check Google, to go check YouTube, all of that, that technically is part of identifying the problem. So I'm going to list it here because it's part of the course, but I'm telling you in real life, that's not really the second step. In real life, that actually forms part of the first step. The real second step is the third one they mention here, which is establish a theory. So now what is my theory? My theory is I think it's a power surge. And I think it's because of that lightning storm. That's my theory. And I think the culprit here is the power supply has kicked the bucket. I'm not saying it is. I need to confirm it first. But that's my theory. Then step 4, well, at least here according to them it's step 4. In real life this will be step 3, is to test your theory. And if it turns out not to be that, then well, you go back to the drawing board and you start all over again. So to test my theory, I in this case need to go and unplug my old power supply, plug a new one in that I knew is brand new or one that I know is still working, plug that sucker in, check if the PC starts, which it probably will, and if it does, well, there you go. Theory has been confirmed and you can move on to the next step. If it does not work, well, then you need to go and establish a new theory and start the whole cycle all over again. Now, assuming this machine starts, which it probably will, then you need to move on to the next step, which they say is step 5, but in reality this is actually step 4. Establish a plan of action. What are you going to do about it? Now, the most logical course of action here, folks, would be to go and replace the power supply. Before anyone says in the comment section, but what about repairing it? Yes, it can be repaired, but specifically with power supplies, and this is not actually part of this course, but specifically of power supplies, we do not repair that. It costs way too much money. It's way cheaper just to go and replace them. You'll find it costs about 10 to 20 times more to fix it versus just to go and replace it. So sometimes you need to go and check which is going to be better. Is it more economical to repair something or to replace something? Power supplies, it's always better to go and replace them because it's way cheaper, 20 times if not more. It's way safer and it's going to last you way longer. Normally, if it's a second-hand power supply and you do go and fix it, it's probably only going to last a couple of months, if even that much. If it's a new one, it's going to last you a heck of a lot longer, cost you 20 times less, if not less, and it's a heck of a lot safer because power supplies generally are very dangerous. You might not notice, but if you have a power supply which is not plugged in, that little silver box inside your desktop PC, even if it's plugged out, it retains a high voltage for very long. This can actually last for years. And if you open it up, the capacitors inside that device, which retains the voltage, it can actually either put you in ICU, give you third-degree burns and all that, or it will kill you. So you should most definitely never ever try to open a power supply unless you're a qualified electrician. But even if you are one, I still wouldn't recommend it because it's just a heck of a lot cheaper just to go replace the darn thing. So why not? Anyway, folks, so now we've got a plan of action. We've established a plan of action. The next step after that would be to implement the solution, to actually go and do it. Then you go and verify full system functionality. Now, before you go and say, hey, but I've done this a million times. I've done this my whole life. I've done this more times than I can count. I do not care if you've done this more times than you can count. You always test. You never assume. One day is one day, and you're going to assume it's working and it's not going to be working. Another thing I want you guys to go and do in this phase is, never mind testing it, get the user who this machine belongs to, get them to come and check it with you, and when you test it, you show them it's, you see here, sir or ma'am, it is working, and you make them sign for it. Because normally what happens is these users have got this pesky habit of breaking something again afterwards, the exact same way even sometimes, and then they'll blame it on the technician being you. It's always the IT guy's fault. It's never their fault. Even though they're the ones that breaks it, they'll even go and break it in the exact same way. Literally there afterwards, they're going to blame you and say, no, you didn't fix it properly the first time. So you make them acknowledge that it's working. You make them sign for it that it's working. And this is often what we would use to go and bill them if you're working in two different companies. And at least afterwards, if they want to say it's not working, you can say, look here, you confirmed that it was working. And then the very last step, folks, is to go and document your findings. I wouldn't say that's compulsory in real life, but it is advisable. It really is going to help you. So whenever you fix something, it's a good idea to go and document whatever you did. So whatever the original problem was, what your original steps was that you took to go and troubleshoot the issue, what ended up being the problem, what ended up being the solution. So that later down the line, if you or one of your fellow colleagues have something similar, you can always go through your notes and just check, oh, you know what? This is what it was last time. Or if the poop hits the fan and someone wants to come back afterwards and say, no, you didn't do this or you didn't do that, then at least you've got all the documentation to prove otherwise. All right, folks, believe it or not, we have finally reached the end of Module 1. Wowza, what a mouthful. Now, before any of you guys disappear on me, if you have not done it already yet, like I said in the beginning of this video, do your homie a favor, give this video a like. You're helping me, you're helping the channel. More people will see this video when you go and give it a like. And if you find this content interesting, if you would like to know when Module 2 comes out or when I release other content, maybe consider subscribing, then at least YouTube will inform you. And then before you guys disappear still, I just want to give a shout out and a thank you to all the sponsors of this channel. I've got quite a lot of Patreon and PayPal sponsors, not to mention all of those of you clicking on the thanks buttons below the video and just buying me coffee and milkshakes. So guys, if you'd like to sponsor the channel, you can find that information in the video description down below. So feel free to sponsor the channel if you'd like to do that. And as for the sponsors, special thank you to all the Patreon sponsors. There's a list of them on the screen at the moment. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate all of you guys. There's a list of the PayPal sponsors on the screen. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. And obviously, there's lots of people that click on the thanks button below the video and that also do other things in the background. All right, guys, and in case you guys don't know, there is a Discord server. So if you know what Discord is, and if you'd like to join my server, there's a Discord server called Free IT Training. It's a very large IT community of people such as yourself that is studying a course like this one, amongst many other ones like A+, and N+, and many other vendors and whatnot. So if you are struggling with your studies, feel free to ask your question there. Maybe you just want to study in a group of other people that's studying the exact same course as you. Well, feel free to go and ask your questions there, or just study in a group. Or if you feel like you want to help some other people out, well, you can go and help them there. You'll even find me in that group amongst many other people that are there to assist you. So yeah, guys. It's a free resource. Make use of it. Don't make use of it. That's your choice. The link is in the description down below. It's literally going to be the very last link at the very bottom of the video description. So feel free to go check it out. I will see you guys in Module 2 of the CompTIA ITF Plus course.